Chapter 21. Survivor. The city had been saved, for now. The main defense territory had been miraculously preserved. Nur still stood. The gates swung open, and the Night Watch filed back in, dragging themselves forward on exhausted legs, each man moving as if he were part of a waking nightmare. It felt unreal to them all, survival like some impossible hallucination after an apocalyptic night. King Noak stood among them, cradling an infant in his arms. The child slept peacefully, cheeks full and soft, occasionally squirming in search of a more comfortable position. Around them, the crowd reacted in all the ways grief and relief can collide. Some people howled and folded into one another, mourning husbands, sons, fathers, brothers who would not return. Others sobbed with joy, clinging to someone they had feared was lost to the war. "Count the numbers," Noak ordered quietly, his face composed and unreadable as he watched the scenes unfold. There was no relief in his eyes, only steady purpose. He turned to the Grand Court swordsman and issued a sharper command. "We don't have much of a window. We must seize the opportunity. Notify the commanders of the four-night watch to regroup immediately, assess their combat strength, and prepare to pursue the orcs." "I understand." Shilon nodded gravely and left the king's side to carry out the order himself. A moment later, a noblewoman with golden hair and a crystal crown pushed through the crowd. People made way for her with slight bows as she passed. She wore a deep blue, elegantly cut gown. Her bearing was composed and graceful, gentle and serene, regal without pretension, noble yet approachable. "Noak!" She hurried, lifting her skirts as she crossed to the king. In the main defense territory, only one person dared call the king by his given name, his wife, Daisy Klaus Noak. "Are you all right?" Daisy's porcelain face was full of concern. She instinctively circled him, checking whether his armor had been damaged. "I'm fine?" Noak's serious expression softened as he looked at her. A rare, gentle smile touched his features. Thanks to him, most of the warriors survived. He raised his arm, beckoning his wife to look at the small shape swaddled beneath his cloak. A child. Daisy's long golden brows drew together. She peered at the baby, and then up at her husband, puzzled. She could not understand how a human infant, a symbol of hope and new life, could appear in the middle of a battlefield full of roaring voices, splintered wood, and death. The day's fighting had been unbelievable. The main defense line had been braced for a fight to the death. Then, as if the earth itself had broken, the battlefield erupted. Orc ranks scattered, chaos ran through the attackers, and by some miracle, most of the Night Watch survived. Noak, his voice low and magnetic, told what he had seen and heard as if reciting an epic. More and more people drifted toward him, eyes wide with disbelief at the tiny miracle in his arms, the infant who had somehow saved Nur. Lady Daisy's thin lips parted. Her emerald eyes trembled as she reached out and took the child from Noak. "Does he have a name?" she asked. "Doom. Doom Noak." King Noak announced the name as if pronouncing fate itself, Doom as the child's given name, Noak as his lineage. "Son of destruction," Daisy whispered, bowing her head as she pressed a gentle kiss to Doom's forehead. Her voice was soft as she added, "And the miracle child, he brings miracles." In the main defense territory, roles were clear. Men were trained to be warriors or to take up other productive trades. Women were entrusted with raising the next generation and passing on the knowledge needed to do so. Before she became a wife, every woman was taught psychological counseling, how to correct and guide children steadily so they would grow into the path the father had chosen for them. Aware of the crowd around them, King Noak bent close and murmured into his wife's ear, "Future king, a warrior king." Daisy's body trembled. She could hardly believe what she'd heard. She looked from Noak to the two tall figures standing a short distance away, calming and comforting the people, her own sons by Noak, and realization washed over her. Noak met his wife's questioning gaze and gently shook his head. There was nothing more to be asked. He laid a hand on her shoulder and spoke with quiet conviction. "Raise him well," he said. "Teach him all you can so he won't go astray." Daisy fell silent, staring down at the infant in her arms. Her eyes trembled as she lost herself in thought. "Night Watch," Noak called. He climbed onto a raised platform, lifted his arm, and cried out. His voice cut through the noise of the crowd like a blade. "Opportunity comes but once." His face was grave, almost carved in stone, as his gaze swept over the assembled soldiers. The orc army is leaderless and scattered. The enemy is divided. This is our chance. There is no time for grief. We must give chase at once, wipe out the orc forces completely, and stop another siege before it starts. He held up 3 fingers. 3 minutes, he ordered flatly. You have 3 minutes to say your goodbyes, then assemble at the training ground, ready to march. A departure in 3 minutes, harsh, abrupt, almost cruel. The order left a cold hush in its wake. They had only 3 minutes. The Night Watch, a unit that had just survived a desperate life-or-death engagement, were given no more. After a handful of breaths, they said farewell to the main defense territory and marched out again on an expedition with no promised return. There were no protests. The men and women of the Night Watch simply tightened their left fists, pressed them to their chests, and saluted their king. Fists rang against breastplate and cuirass. Metal clashed, a single sharp sound that answered an unspoken vow. Orders would be obeyed. Duty would not waver. There was time for nothing more than quick, wordless embraces with loved ones. Then the white-armored soldiers picked up their weapons, moved to the training grounds to assemble, steadied their minds, and readied themselves for the next fight. 3 minutes later, the Night Watch stood in formation, disciplined and silent, waiting for the battle plan. Elton Senna! King Nowic's voice cut through the hush. The name itself carried meaning, a name that spoke of speed. A single figure stepped from the ranks, a warrior clad in specialized power armor, a spear the size of a tree at his side. He dropped to one knee, spear planted in the earth. "My king," he said. "You depart at once," Nowick ordered. "Go and see whether the knights have forgotten their charge." That glorious mission, handed down from the colonial era. Nowick's face was calm, but there was no hiding the heat in his voice. "Tell them this, if I do not see them within 48 hours, then the knights will be struck from Nur's history. As you command, I will deliver your message exactly." Senna rose, vaulted onto an anti-gravity motorcycle parked nearby, tapped the chassis with his great spear, thumbed the throttle, and streaked away at supersonic speed to carry the king's decree to the desert knights. "Leave 1,000 men to hold the city," Nowick ordered. "All other combat units will depart. During the engagement, break into smaller groups for flexible pursuit. Focus on wiping out the orcs' remaining forces and dealing with the aftermath." His gaze swept over the Night Watch, standing at attention. Nowick closed his fingers around his sword hilt, drew the blade of light, and bellowed, "Depart, fearless Night Watch." "We are Nur's keen edge. We will cut down every enemy," came the first reply. "We are Nur's steadfast wall. Victory is ours," answered the second. With those war cries, the Night Watch set out, beginning the hunt. They had fought across the wasteland, in the mountains, even behind enemy lines, vowing to wipe out every foe. 3 months later, King Nowick returned with a small detachment and was met once more by Queen Daisy. In the palace's rear garden, still clad in armor, Nowick sat on a stone bench. The queen stood before him, worry etched between her brows. "Nowick," she said softly. Her melodic voice trembled. Daisy knelt and rested her head on his thigh, laying her hand over his for comfort, drawing strength and calm from her husband. Nowick reached up to stroke her golden hair, but paused when he saw his gauntlet still stained with blood. He hesitated, then murmured, "That child." Daisy covered his large hand with her own and felt, for a moment, an unusual calm. She closed her eyes and spoke slowly. "I'm a little afraid of that child. Whenever I face him, I get a deep instinctive dread." Chapter 22. No need to fear. "You might not believe it," Daisy said, holding her hand about 1.2 meters, roughly 4 feet off the ground. "He's already this tall." Nowick rubbed his golden hair, then stilled. Surprise flickered across his face. He really hadn't expected a 3-month-old to be that tall. "That is unusually fast," he admitted, "but he did survive an explosion at the center of the blast when he fell from the sky. Some extraordinary traits are to be expected." Daisy shook her head. "It's not just his size. Doom can eat at least 100 caddies of pure meat a day, so his physical growth I can understand. A caddy is about half a kilogram. What worries me is how fast he learns," she continued. "Just 3 months. No, to be precise, 2 months ago, there was nothing left for me to teach him. He's already read 1/5 of the ancient texts in the Grand Library, and he can recite them backward." "Nowick, my king," Daisy stood, then knelt on the lawn, her emerald eyes fixed on her husband. Doom's learning ability and these extraordinary qualities frighten me. There's often just a fine line between a genius and a madman. Those words from his wife hit Nowick harder than he expected. He said nothing, staring at the stone table before him, eyes unfocused, lost in thought and unable to spare any other attention. Daisy's warning wasn't baseless. Knowledge could be a blessing and a curse. It recorded humanity's greatest triumphs, but it also hid a deeper darkness between the lines. Queen Daisy waited in silence. She knew the king was weighing the problem and trusted that he would find an answer. This matter had troubled them for a long time, and at last Nowick seemed to have reached a decision. After a long pause, he came back to himself and looked down at his wife. "From now on," he said, "don't try to control him too much, and don't live in fear of him. Just love him, truly love him, and love him always." "Love?" Daisy asked, confused. She hesitated, then added softly, "Nowick, I care for that child very deeply. Everyone who meets Doom likes him." Daisy tucked a golden strand of hair behind her ear, puzzled. "I don't quite follow. What do you mean?" Nowick didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he asked, almost casually, "Does Doom respect you?" He waited a beat, watching her, then went on as if the answer were obvious. "He's sensible, polite, and so well-behaved." Daisy thought for a moment. Apart from the instinctive unease she sometimes felt, she couldn't think of a single real flaw. "He is," she admitted. "He listens, and he learns. Whatever I teach him, he thinks it through, and then does it perfectly." A smile crept onto her face before she could stop it. Doom's ability to act is exemplary. What mother wouldn't be proud, especially when the child was so exemplary? He finished his homework without argument, so it was almost impossible to say no when he asked for something harmless. The small guilty pleasures, fried food, a few hours of video games, still crept into his routine, the kinds of bad habits that made mothers sigh rather than rage. Nowick, who had been watching her, let out an abrupt, unexpectedly loud laugh. His composed expression split into a grin that showed his white teeth as he chuckled. "Nowick!" Daisy scolded, but the look she gave him was more fond than angry. She let out a long breath, unsure whether these habits would help or harm Doom. Nowick smiled and took his beloved's pale hand, stroking it gently. "You don't need to be afraid," he said. "He loves you. He's curious about the world beyond us. He has things he enjoys." "You're right," he went on, cupping her hand and kissing the back of it. "Everything you've done shows he has humanity and complex emotions. He isn't some monster wearing human skin. You taught him well. You kept that blank slate from being sullied. Nor should you fear him. It is our humanity that lets us tell right from wrong, and you have given him a very solid foundation. Be confident, indeed be proud. To be the mother of an extraordinary child takes courage. The courage to accept what makes him different. But don't set him up as a god. Even if he could crush a planet with a single blow, he is still your son. The innate talent Doom displays isn't something he chose, nor something he can fully control. Don't worry about his outward strength, King Nowick told her. At heart, he's still a child who needs love and guidance. I understand. Daisy listened quietly to her husband's counsel. As he spoke, many of her fears eased and a calmness settled over her. I will do as you say, love him without reservation, and accept whatever makes him different. Sometimes I feel helpless, she admitted after a moment, the faint smile returning to her porcelain skin. I worry I won't be able to teach him. If you can't give him everything he needs in instruction, the king said gently, then give him love. In the end, love is the greatest gift we can offer. Everything else will fade. You always guide with such wisdom. The queen leaned against his knee, savoring a rare spell of peace in the quiet courtyard. It was a small reprieve. She knew their reunion would be brief. Before long, the king would set out again to drive back the green-skinned orcs. Their power had been much reduced, but they were like a stubborn illness, always surfacing, always a threat. The War College's research had a grim finding. The greenskins reproduced asexually, much like fungi. They didn't need mates. Any stray hair or dander shed from their bodies could take root once it touched the ground, drawing nutrients from the soil until a new greenskin pushed up like a mushroom. That biological quirk made the enemy especially pernicious. You could wipe out whole swarms, but unless you cleaned up every trace, new ones would sprout. In the end, post-war cleanup would be more important and more time-consuming than the fighting itself. Nawick. Daisy spoke his name softly, a sadness in her voice. Ennio and Flano, do they really have no chance? Nawick's answer was a single sound, a slow, heavy hum that carried the weight of a decision. Firm as iron, uncompromising. They had 2 sons. The eldest, Ennio Novick, and the younger, Flano Novick, were both fine men. Before the doom came, Ennio had been Nawick's favored heir, the one most fit to succeed him as leader of the Night Watch. Like the generations of Novicks before him, he would have led the people of Nur toward any sliver of hope, and if possible, back into the depths of space. But everything had changed. Nawick's gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the old calculations and old loyalties. He had found a different kind of hope, a real chance to break free from their chains once and for all. I feel a little heartbroken for Ennio. She lay with her head in his lap, so he couldn't see her face, but Nawick heard the words, choked and small. He's been striving for decades, day in and day out, without rest, trying to understand you, to inherit everything you are, to live up to your expectations. Warm tears spattered his cold armor. Nawick's hand tightened into a fist and then relaxed. He had once wavered, wondering if his choice had been hasty. Now he was certain nothing could shake him. He stroked his wife's back with a large, steady hand. "Have you seen Doom's talent?" he asked softly. "Can Ennio possibly catch up to him?" The queen's body trembled. She stammered, "What Ennio hasn't reached yet is barely the starting point, a nothing compared to where Doom already stands." "You, who have had the most contact with Doom, should understand that," Nawick said. "You should understand my choice." "This is too unfair," she whispered. "Can Ennio accept it?" "The world is unfair," Nawick sighed. "If Ennio truly understands me, he will know this is the right decision." "Our family's oath isn't bound to this throne room," he added quietly. "The Novick vow reaches far beyond, to the wider world, to the universe itself." After that, the two fell silent. Daisy's tears dried as she drifted off, her head resting against Nawick's shoulder. A moment later, a court lady burst into the courtyard, breathless and flustered. "Your Majesty, the third prince has gone to the arena." Daisy's eyes flew open. She pushed herself up so fast she nearly fell. "Take me there," she snapped. A large hand closed on her wrist and held her steady. Nawick's voice was low and even. "I'll go too. I haven't seen Doom since the Siege War." Chapter 23. Why Fear the Guard Arena stood at the heart of the City of Warriors, a vast circle hewn from a single, monolithic stone. Tiered stands rose in concentric rings around the central pit, climbing outward until they could hold hundreds of thousands of spectators. It was a place of trials and duels, where warriors met blade to blade, merciless and wordless, letting their skill and steel decide superiority. On special nights, when the Night Watch were not away on campaign, competitions were held here to burn off excess energy and to name the strongest champion. Tonight, however, the arena lay hushed. With the Night Watch on expedition, there was none of the usual clash of blades or the thunderous roar of the crowd. The place felt ancient and solemn. Dark red banners hung from the upper tiers, gold threads spelling each champion's name, while beneath them, the opponents they had felled were listed in neat rows. The pennants fluttered in the wind, each movement a silent recounting of past glories. In the outer stands, more than a dozen Night Watch veterans have returned from the front and are finally resting. Their white power armor is streaked with dried blood and dust, faces etched with exhaustion. No one disturbs them. The weary warriors sit back to back with closed eyes, taking what sleep they can before the next deployment. In the central area, a handful of stationed guards have taken over the watches, overseeing a row of reinforced iron cages that hold dozens of greenskins. A small crowd has gathered, robed scholars from the War College, warrior apprentices still months away from earning their Night Watch marks, and a scattering of curious commoners. Inside the cages, the orcs crouch with brutish muscles and blood-red eyes, bared fangs and low, constant growls meant to intimidate their human spectators. These were orcs captured on the front lines and sent to the rear, kept for researchers studying orc culture at the War College and used as living whetstones for apprentices to practice and hone their skills. I don't care much for aliens, but the Academy says orcs are like fungi. Their flesh must taste like mushrooms. Perfect for stew or a barbecue. It would be amazing. A boy pushed forward through the crowd. He was barely 1.2 meters tall, less than half the height of a night watch warrior, but he showed no fear of the prisoners inside the cages. He leaned on the bars, eyes glittering as he stared at the confined orcs. The guards all turned to look at the bold speaker. He was young, but not merely because of his words. His voice rang clear and bright, with a natural charm that made people listen. He was handsome in a fresh-faced way, large, striking black and white eyes, a straight, well-defined nose, and a fair, rosy complexion that still had the softness of youth. There was something in his bearing, less naivete than his peers, more heroism and nobility, that made it easy to imagine him growing into a dashing, heroic man. "Oh, ho, ho, ho!" The orcs in the cage laughed, clutching their bellies with one hand and pointing at the youth with the other, howling so hard tears and snot streamed down their faces. "Little shrimp? Eat me? Wah!" Having fought humans for years and quick to learn, the orcs understood human speech. The youth's bold words amused them. Lifting the gloom of captivity, they brightened at once. "Orcs must be delicious," one of the greener-skinned ones crowed. Then others copied the line with ridiculous gestures, jabbering nonsense as they rolled about the cage. The youth didn't seem offended. His tone was strangely earnest, even eager at the thought of tasting a greenskin. Then someone nearby asked, "Whose child are you?" The voice was hoarse and low, gruff as gravel grinding over stone, hardened and weathered. The youth turned at the sound and found himself staring at a tall warrior in white armor, the plates streaked with blood. 2 lightsaber hilts hung at the man's waist. An unactivated guard spear rested in his right hand, and his helmet was tucked under his left arm. He stood amrod straight, radiating a fierce, uncompromising aura. Thick brows framed large, bright eyes, their tiger-like intensity alive and alert, and a few scars raked his cheeks, not marring his features but adding to his heroic presence. "Outstanding warrior, champion swordsman, duelist Harlan Ogilvy," the youth blurted, the titles tumbling out with the reverence of a name everyone in the arena knew. Harlan blinked in surprise. He had never seen this energetic young man before. "You know me?" he asked. The youth gave him a quick, appraising look, then nodded toward the highest banner that hung over the arena. 20-time arena champion, he said, with a faintly patronizing lift to his voice. "When you enter, the championship comes with you. Your name hangs right up there." Harlan's mouth twitched. He forced a smile to cover his sudden embarrassment. Years of constant warfare had dulled his senses, and he'd even forgotten he carried a little fame in the main defense territory. The boy in front of him looked down on him without trying to hide it. Clear, appraising eyes that saw nothing but a muscle-headed brute. "What's your name?" Harlan asked. He couldn't place the youth, but something about him suggested he wasn't from an ordinary family. "Doom Novik, 3rd son of King Novik," the youth answered, lifting his chin. His voice had an edge of solemn pride. Doom Novik?" Harlan echoed, and then the scars on his face twitched with surprise. "The child who fell from the sky 3 months ago?" "No," the boy said. Harlan, who had witnessed that strange descent, frowned in disbelief. He hung his helmet at his belt and used his spear like a measuring stick. 3 months ago you were only this tall?" he asked, holding the spear at a low mark. He looked the boy over again, the plain robe he wore, and the faint, mysterious mark on the youth's chest, just visible beneath the fabric. The image from 3 months ago and the confident figure before him didn't match, and Harlan found himself more unsettled than he liked to admit. After a beat of stunned silence, Harlan, the champion swordsman, a man who had seen more than his share of wonders, finally spoke. He looked Doom over, then grinned and asked the youth, "What have you been eating to grow so fast? A palace secret recipe I don't know about." The shout drew a cluster of frontline fighters who had never seen Doom before. They pushed forward, curiosity written on their faces. Harlan flourished his hands and exaggerated the story as he spoke, which set off a ripple of astonished comments among the night watch. "I've never seen a child grow that quickly," one muttered. The guards exchanged impressed looks, murmuring among themselves. At that moment, King Nelwick and Queen Daisy reached the edge of the arena and took in the scene. Doom standing at the center, surrounded by hard-eyed warriors. Daisy's first instinct was to step in and pull the youth out of the crowd, but Nowick caught her wrist and murmured, in a voice low enough for only her to hear, "Let's see how he interacts with the guards." The men encircling Doom radiated the scent of battle and a palpable killing intent, but the boy showed no fear. He puffed out his chest and called out, loud and unbothered, "All this fuss over nothing. I fell from the sky, so isn't it natural that I'd grow fast?" Doom never felt awkward about being different. He took people's astonishment in stride. The Night Watch listened, went quiet for a beat, then exploded into laughter. "Ha! Ha! Ha!" Harlan laughed the loudest. He tossed his spear to a comrade, hoisted Doom up, and slung him onto his shoulders. The men liked the boy. His blunt honesty and casual confidence endeared him to them. Harlan raised him high, then eased down into a squat, holding Doom's shoulders with both hands and grinning up at him. "So, what, you think orcs are delicious?" he teased. Doom's face went serious. "It's an interesting thought, but orcs are a warlike people. You must always keep your guard up and show them proper respect." Harlan's grin softened into an amused nod. "I agree with most of that. I just take issue with one point." Doom nodded back, solemn as a tiny adult, his youthful features somehow carrying a gravity far beyond his years. Doom looked Harlan square in the eye, Harlan, the champion swordsman and the Night Watch's most celebrated warrior, and said lightly, "You have to be on your guard against orcs, of course. But why should I be afraid of a tasty little mushroom?" Harlan's smile froze. The wrinkle at his mouth tightened, and his expression went from amused to guarded. The boy struck him as unapologetically cocky, naive in his confidence. Instead of scolding him, Harlan tapped the cage where the orc was held. It wasn't an ordinary orc kid, but a commando, stronger and far craftier than most. He let his question hang in the air, forcing Doom to actually consider the gap between bravado and reality. "Can you beat that thing?" "Yes." Doom's voice was clear and flat, absolute. One punch and one kick. The steadiness in the youth's eyes silenced Harlan. He found himself wondering what sort of upbringing Queen Daisy had given this third prince, so different in bearing from his two modest elder brothers, almost not of the same cloth. Doom noticed the flicker of doubt in the swordsman's gaze and called it out before Harlan could hide it. "You don't believe me." "Champion swordsman." Doom removed Harlan's hands from his shoulders. His face was grave, his bright eyes boring into Harlan with a pressure that demanded attention. "I'm not exaggerating, I'm stating a fact." Confronted with those clear, heated eyes and the faint aura that was beginning to rise around him, Harlan found he couldn't hold the stare. He looked away slowly. Doom scanned the Night Watch and saw the contempt in their expressions. It stung him. He thought briefly that his small stature made him less convincing, so their doubts were hardly surprising. With a helpless shrug, he snapped, "One day you'll see I'm not just talking." A deep, commanding voice cut through the tension. "What if I give you a chance to prove it?" Everyone turned at once. One of the Night Watch who recognized the voice dropped to a knee and cried, "My king!" 24. Prove yourself. Doom turned toward the sound. From the edge of the arena strode a warrior clad in dark green power armor, a jet-black cape trimmed in gold sweeping behind him. He was nearly 3 meters tall and utterly imposing. At his side walked Queen Daisy, resplendent in a long court dress, her hands folded modestly over her abdomen. She regarded Doom with a faint, knowing smile. Doom recognized him at once. The planet's supreme authority, its fiercest warrior, its wisest monarch, his father, Nowick. The Night Watch dropped to their knees, and the scholars bowed their heads in unison, greeting their king. Doom, by contrast, felt stiff with tension. He had once pictured this moment differently, meeting his father on Triumphal Avenue, throwing open his arms to welcome a victorious return. This was not that scene. Instead, he felt like a child caught in the act, awkward, uneasy, and not knowing where to put his hands. "Answer me, Doom." King Nowick stepped forward. He signaled for everyone to stand and loomed over his son, so small he didn't even come up to the king's knee, and asked, stern and unblinking, "If I give you the chance, can you prove it?" Doom looked up. His father's face was a mask of authority. His towering presence pressed down on the hall so heavily that no one dared lie. For a moment, nerves flickered across the boy's features, then confidence replaced them. He straightened, raised his chin, and spoke clearly, every syllable steady. "I'll prove what I said. No exaggeration, no lies." That certainty banished the last of his fear. "Your son scorns empty boasts," he added defiantly. "With just one punch and one kick," Nowick asked, eyebrow raised. "With just one punch and one kick," Doom repeated. "Very good." Nowick nodded, satisfied. His gaze swept past his son to the night watch and the cages of beasts, then he let out a low roar that filled the hall. "Clear the arena. Let's see what the Son of Heaven can do." "Yes, Your Majesty." The night watch moved with practiced efficiency. Cages were hauled away, the arena cleared, and the audience settled into their seats, buzzing with anticipation for a duel like no other. "Be ready. The orc won't stop. Your only choices are victory or death." King Nowick's voice carried over the arena. "The duel rules, death match." A murmur ran through the crowd. A death match hadn't been seen in the Night Watch for nearly 1,000 years, an unrestricted fight where both combatants may use any means to kill the other. Harlan's face tightened. He was meticulous by nature and felt the weight of responsibility for what had been set in motion. Sending a child into a duel gnawed at him. He stepped forward and said gently, "Be careful." Doom's eyes flashed. "I will break your contempt with my strength." He slipped his silk robe down to his waist and tied it off, exposing a lean, well-defined torso. "Then you will apologize to me for your contempt," he added, the words hard as a vow. Harlan gave a rueful smile, then straightened, the smile falling away into something sincere. "If you win," he said quietly, "I will apologize for my contempt." From the edge of the arena, King Nowick had seen the exchange and now called out, amused and sharp, "How about we make it more interesting? A wager." "What wager?" both men asked at once. King Nowick looked at Harlan and said, "If Doom survives, you will serve as his personal guard. If he fails and dies, the royal family will record and preserve your personal sword techniques as a reward for your participation." Harlan agreed without hesitation. It was a risk with only winners. If Doom lived, Harlan would gain the honor and steady position of serving the man who defeated the orc. If Doom died, Harlan's techniques would finally be acknowledged and added to the royal archive. In the main defense territory, there were countless skilled swordsmen, but only a handful of true masters whose methods were collected by the crown and passed down as part of the royal martial heritage. Harlan had once petitioned to have his style added, and Heish had been turned down by Grand Swordsman Shi Lan. His blade work was judged too wild and aggressive to fit the royal family's more upright, magnanimous tradition. This bargain was, in Harlan's eyes, nothing short of a godsend. Doom, likewise, agreed at once. Toppling an orc champion would be no easy feat, but having the champion swordsman as his personal guard afterward would be a tremendous honor. Neither man felt he was at a disadvantage. Harlan approached the iron cage. The orcs inside, who'd been goofy a moment before, were suddenly all business, eyes bright, muscles tensed. Green skins tended to be that way. They worried about little else and lived for the fight. "Pick me, I'm the best," one bellowed. "You're blind? Pick me," another snarled. They raked their hands along the bars, baring huge teeth and roaring to prove how fierce they were. Harlan hesitated, about to choose one of the ordinary commando kids, when Doom stepped up to the cage. He pointed at the largest of the lot. "That's the strongest," he said. "If I beat it, my victory will mean more." Harlan's thick brows drew together. He tugged at the scar on his face, making his features look harsher, and fixed Doom with a warning look that said he should not press his luck. "I'm sure," Doom answered, cool and definite. His voice carried a calm authority that left Harlan momentarily off balance. "Big man, open the cage," Doom ordered. "I can't wait," snarled the orc from inside the cage. Draped in a coarse animal hide, he bared yellowed fangs and shook the iron bars with huge calloused hands. Crimson eyes burned with ferocity as he fixed his glare on Doom. "You hateful human commando kid. I'll tear your limbs off, rip you to shreds. I'll chew your bones bit by bit until only that blabbering little mouth is left. Then we'll see how tough you are." Harlan unlatched the cage with a sharp click and pushed the orc out into the arena. The creature strode forward eagerly, but Harlan barked a warning before it could throw itself at Doom. "This is a warrior's arena. Show some honor. No sudden moves until I call the start. You know our rules." Doom, known in the pits as the Commando Kid, didn't need a reminder of the Night Watch's reputation. He only smiled, a small, confident curl at the corner of his mouth, and walked to his mark. In human territory, he muttered under his breath as he took his stance, one fights like a human. Queen Daisy leaned toward Harlan, lowering her voice so Doom wouldn't hear. Aren't you worried at all? She whispered. She knew her son, his razor perception, uncanny athleticism, and surprising strength, and in her heart she wasn't. Facing an orc in a controlled match like this wasn't the real danger. It was simply a test, and Doom was frighteningly well prepared. Not worried. Where does your confidence come from? Nowick thought back to the siege 3 months earlier, to that heartbeat-stopping moment when he lifted Doom for the first time and felt his hair stand on end. He still remembered the strange certainty that had come then, the first time I held him. Now, in the center of the arena, 2 combatants faced off. They were a study in contrast. The commando kid towered at 2.3 meters, squat and brutal, his skin the color of fresh grass, muscles and veins knotted across a ferocious, snorting face. Doom stood in a simple robe tied at his waist. The robe revealed a lean, wiry torso and a single, unmistakable rune burned into his chest. They were 10 meters apart. Nowick could feel the orc's hot animal ferocity even from that distance, the low snorts of barely contained excitement. Harlan finished his announcement, gave Doom a long look, and tossed the helmet into the air. When the helmet lands, you may begin. At that instant, the arena went suddenly, tautly quiet. No one dared make a sound that might sway the duel. Even the caged orcs, who had been roaring and jeering a moment before, fell silent, their blood-red eyes wide, rapt with anticipation, waiting for the commando kid to rend the human boy apart. Harlan was just as tense. His tiger-like eyes were fixed on the center of the arena, calculating whether he would have to dive in to rescue the child if things went bad. A helmet clattered to the ground with a sharp bang that rippled through the arena, into the ears of the crowd and the duelists alike. The commando kid let out a savage little roar and grinned. His legs pumped in a blur, taking short, furious strides as he lunged for Doom. Doom stood perfectly still, as if frozen, half petrified yet somehow arrogant, already picturing in his head how he would rip the orc apart. The orc's short-range burst was terrifyingly fast. In only 0.56 seconds, he closed to within 2 meters of Doom. The Night Watch grew uneasy. Their Golden Age bloodlines had given them frighteningly quick reflexes. To them, the orc's advance looked almost like slow motion. Still, despite how it seemed, he kept inching closer. Harlan narrowed his eyes and readied his spear to intervene, then suddenly felt a cold, piercing gaze settle on him. He didn't dare move again. King Nowick would brook no breach of the dueling arena's rules. Doom remained where he stood, face devoid of fear, his posture calm and unhurried. 25. Blood Sacrifice. To which god? The moment his helmet came off, Doom's focus snapped into a different realm. The world in his vision wasn't the world ordinary men saw. Time thickened, and everything around him seemed suspended in syrup. The charging orc's wide-open maw, the clench of its fist, the 1,000 muscles coiling for the attack, the fast, stuttering beat of its heart, and the blood rushing through its veins, all of it fell under Doom's scrutiny. He watched how the orc's back would twist, how its next strike would be formed. By the time the orc took its first step, Doom already knew the shape of its attack. In an instant, understates it. More precisely, in a single nanosecond, Doom's mind ran 1,000-fold analysis. In the span light would travel only 30 centimeters, he had simulated 1,000 different ways to end the threat. Yet, despite all those possibilities, he chose the simplest. One punch, one kick, killing the greenskin exactly as had been agreed, honoring the promise between father and son. The orc's roar stretched out, endless in Doom's ears. It raised its fist, ready to bring it down. Doom watched the caged creature's eyes shift from glee to fanatic hunger. It wanted to see blood, to cheer for the kill. He tightened his jaw. One punch, one kick, and it would be over. He measured the distance with clinical precision. The orc towered over him, almost twice his height. Its reach was a real danger. No matter how quick his mind, his body had limits. Doom knew his reaction times, knew how far his limbs could move. He was still growing, faster than the orc, yes, but not by a huge margin. As they closed to striking range, he sneered at the ecstatic beast. At the instant the orc registered the change, Doom dropped into a squat. A sweeping kick. He planted his right leg and lashed his left out in a hard arc. The orc's upper body was all power and muscle, but its legs were short and comparatively fragile. Doom had pinpointed that weakness and struck with everything he had. "Kid! Die!" The commando kid roared as he brought his fist down, a blow meant to smash bone and tear muscle. But Doom answered in an instant. Crack! The sickening snap of shin on shin echoed through the hall. The Night Watch sprang to their feet, watching the counterattack unfold. Doom had met the charge head-on and won. His left leg swept low, smashing into the orc's shin and breaking it. The commando kid staggered as balance abandoned him. Doom used the momentum. The boy spun with the sweep, coiling his weight into his left fist. "Die!" he snarled, a fierce, youthful roar that stirred the air like a young tiger. The broken leg hadn't registered yet. The pain nerves lagged, so the orc didn't even realize his limb was shattered. By the time he felt himself tipping, Doom's compact, iron-hard fist slammed into his face. Blackness closed around him. He was out cold. The punch collapsed the orc's cheek. Doom's iron fist drove clean through, bursting out of the back of the commando kid's skull. Brain and blood sprayed everywhere. With that single, unstoppable blow, Doom ended the savage creature. One kick, one punch. He stood unshaken while the orc that had been sure of victory a second before hung from his arm, its head caved in and its limbs convulsing. The caged orcs screamed and thrashed, clutching their heads and whooping with savage glee. They didn't care who survived, only who won. Doom had given them a show that set their blood boiling. "Awesome!" someone shouted, and the cry spread into a wild roar. The Night Watch broke into applause. A death match with such a size disparity, decided in less than a second, the underdog had prevailed. Doom's movements were sharp and merciless, a single decisive action that left no doubt. The orcs screamed, the watch cheered, and the arena buzzed with the aftershock of the fight. In that instant, Doom could neither hear nor see. The arena before him was frozen, time itself suspended at the moment he had killed the orc, as the creature's life ebbed and its hot blood spilled. For a breathless second, and the world simply stopped. Reality slipped away like a drawn curtain, becoming thin and unreal as an image in a mirror. He glanced down at his arm. The dead orc's body had vanished, leaving no trace it had ever been there. Darkness closed in around him. He lost every external sensation. It had never happened before. He was suddenly like a blind, deaf man, unable to tell whether his eyes were open or shut. Then, carried on the air, a strong smell of blood forced him to snap his eyes open, and the sight that met him nearly knocked him back. A boundless wasteland stretched beneath a perpetually burning sky. There was no soil, no grass. The rolling hills and barren flats were formed of jagged, blood-red stone. Rivers that wound in from the distance ran with blistering lava and stank of sulfur. Doom looked down and saw, at his feet, a mound of stark white skulls. There were human skulls and orc skulls. Some he recognized, others he did not, stacked layer upon layer into a grotesque mound. Doom stared at that hill of bone and could feel, in some part of him he did not understand, that it was more than a pile. It was a beacon. Beyond what his eyes could see, past the thin veil that separates the world from the warp, the wills of the four gods had converged at the edge of their domains. In the narrow seam between reality and illusion, a fragile, blood-red world floated cupped in Khorne's claws. It trembled on the brink, swaying as if it might shatter at any moment. Nurgle leaned in and exhaled a murky breath, seeding the broken globe with a kind of perverse immortality, just enough to patch the cracks and hold the illusion together. Khorne cradled the blood world in his palm, an uneasy satisfaction tightening his chest. "The purity of the first kill is beautiful," he rumbled, more to himself than to the others. "When blood flows and violence rings out, it cleaves the soul clean. I paid dearly to drag his spirit from the material universe into the cold space between reality and the Empyrean." He paused, frowning at the stubborn life within that borrowed shell. Even after his soul was reborn as flesh, he kept his instincts for self-preservation. Our voices barely reach him. He is not easily bent. A chill passed between the gods. Time there was thin, opportunity thinner. "There is only one chance," Khorne said flatly. "We must move quickly. His essence resists the power of the Empyrean. It won't be long before he returns to the material universe." Doom stood on Skull Hill, staring out over the blood-red waste. A sudden burn flared in his chest. He looked down. The birthmark he'd always borne was glowing faintly, as if something had reached out and touched it. Doom had never known where the mark came from, what it meant, or what it could do. He had no idea what presence it was answering. Doom. The voice came from behind, layered and ethereal, like several voices speaking at once and folding into one another. When he turned, the barren plain had altered as if a curtain had been drawn. 4 colossal chairs had erupted from the ground, towers of raw, impossible scale that climbed from earth to sky. The first was a deep azure, its surface throwing back shifting auroras. Its seat and back were not solid at all, but a writhing vortex, constantly changing, never holding one shape, refusing any fixed form or number. The second was the opposite, ancient and spare, as if cast in a forgotten age from skulls fused with brass. Those brass-boned skulls wept a perpetual blood, a violent, unending tide that filled the air with the sense of conflict. Blood and brass, violence and conflict. The third chair was a deathly, indescribable green. Tree roots and moss curled around its armrests, and its surface gurgled and bubbled with pustules, acne, and tumor-like cysts, occasionally dripping jaundiced pus. Decayed yet pulsing with life, it was vivid and utterly corrupted at once. The fourth chair radiated a seductive purple, its body seemingly hewn from smooth, pale flesh. The armrests were soft red lips, and grasping arms reached out the backrest. Bas-reliefs that hinted at hidden organs marred every surface, and a sickly, enticing perfume hung about it. Every curve whispered indulgence, but beneath the sumptuousness lurked rot. Any ordinary person faced with the 4 chairs, each a manifestation of a cardinal sin, would likely lose their mind and slip into depravity. Doom, however, remained entirely unmoved, dismissing them as nothing more than flamboyant displays, like animals showing off their plumage. You only need to recite the incantation. No one sat in the chairs, but the voices pouring from them were thunderous. Serve us, and we shall grant you the power to conquer eternity. Doom stared at the empty seats, some ornate, some grotesque, his brow furrowed into 3 short vertical lines, an expression of pure bafflement. What he was seeing and hearing defied everything he knew. What incantation? Can I leave? He thought. Serve whom? Obtain what power? He had no interest in bargains or divine favors. He just wanted out of this bizarre place as fast as possible. Behind the veil, the 4 gods rejoiced. They hadn't expected it to go so smoothly. Could the most mysterious Primarch finally be theirs? Their voices blended into a single honeyed tone. You can leave. Just repeat after us. Serve the gods. The coaxing was irresistible. Doom breathed out the first word, drawing it out. Serve. He was about to finish the phrase when, without warning, the unified harmony splintered. The single voice burst into 4 different shouts, fragmented and discordant. Blood for the god. Change for the prince. Corruption. And in that instant, the 4 chairs vanished. The single, harmonious voice fractured into 4, each strand trying to say something different. A crackling interference ran through them, so the meanings never fully took shape. Blood for what god? Doom stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the empty space where the chairs had been. Chapter 26. It's a blood sacrifice to the blood god. In the convulsing void of the warp, the borders between the 4 gods slammed together, sending out waves of light brighter than any divine war that had come before. At the last moment, the fragile mask of concord was ripped away. The Chaos gods abandoned their pretense of unity and fell on one another, each vying to bend Doom to his will. They tempted the captive with blasphemous syllables, hoping he would speak the binding incantation that would make him their servant. And at the same time, they sabotaged each other, scrambling every full word before it could reach Doom's ears. Damn it! I almost had him! Khorne bellowed, furious. He'd been a hair's breadth from claiming Doom for himself when the final syllable was snatched away, undone at the last instant by the accursed machinations of Tzeentch. The blood-red world fractured like glass. With a disdainful, sardonic chuckle, Tzeentch casually dispersed the loose thread of sorcery at his fingertips and drifted away. Delight danced at the edges of his voice as he taunted the enraged blood god. The blood god, who prides himself on open war and direct blows, resorts to a scheme. I'll save you a good spot in the crystal labyrinth. And you, the blood god's fury coalesced into a blood shadow, a roiling silhouette that swung a long, crimson sword at the fleeing Nurgle. Nurgle's rot-bloated form tipped and rolled, narrowly avoiding the blade's streak of light, then slumped back toward his own foul domain. His voice carried from the horizon. "You were the one trying to hog it all!" "You," Khorne snarled, slashing again. "Especially you. I'd kill Doom before I let you near him." Slaanesh, lithe and sinuous, slipped through the attack as if dancing and retreated toward his palace. "We agreed he was to belong to us collectively," he purred. "You broke the rules first. Get out, all of you! Get out!" Khorne's roar shook the boundaries between the four, shredding the warp storm with its violence. Doom had no idea that the gods' bickering had, in effect, saved him. Their squabbles kept any one of them from completing the ritual that would make him their pawn. It had been an unbearably dangerous moment. Had the incantation finished, he would have been forced to surrender his soul outright, bound forever to one of the warp's foul gods. The ruinous powers of the warp were too selfish to share. If more than one god hungered after the same soul, they would sooner see it destroyed than let another touch it. "Is anyone there? Is anyone still here?" After the four chairs vanished, the crimson void was still. Doom kept calling into the silence, testing the boundaries, waiting for any chance to leave. The sigil burned faintly on his chest, a little warmth under his skin that pulsed like a message, promising escape, promising something else. He could feel that it would open for him soon. Far off in the warp, the blood god's wrath still seethed. Khorne reached out with a sensing of his own and confirmed what he had suspected. His brothers had gone, their attention no longer fixed on this place. He plunged a hand into the molten flow and drew up a globe the color of fresh blood, cradling it with a grin. If Khorne was war incarnate, he was also a tactician. He had noticed, sharp as a blade, the moment Doom had cut down the greenskin. That quickness and decisiveness, a bright, snarling echo of violence, pleased him. Without hesitation, Khorne used his authority of slaughter to reproduce that echo, shaping it into something he could use. The taste of Doom's fury fit neatly into the plan he began to weave. Side by side with his three brothers, he set the trap. A whisper, a temptation, a promise to shepherd Doom down into chaos. The blood god's disruption had been timed to perfection. He tore himself free at the exact instant, letting his rage scatter the other gods so he could reap the harvest alone, away from his brother's sight. Even Tzeentch's keen-eyed scrutiny was fooled. Khorne used a subtle substitution to hide the true world. He rolled up a storm and dragged the little pocket world entirely into his domain. To disguise his real purpose, he kept sending out waves of destructive fury that tore countless lesser demons apart. He stifled a laugh, hiding the pleasure of his success. Finally, the prize would be his alone. Khorne poured his will back into that small world and listened as Doom's voice drifted into the void, uncertain. "Is anyone there? Sacrifice to which god?" the man shouted. "It's blood for the blood god, boy." The sudden voice made Doom jump. He spun around and found the brass throne standing where nothing had been moments before. The voice that came from the chair was deep, wild, and contained, rained anger wrapped in command. "Doom, I have watched you for a long time. We do not have much time left. You should know, I am a true god. Speak the words, blood for the blood god, and I will grant you endless power. Conquer 1,000,000 kingdoms, become an undefeated warrior, and forge an eternal legend." Doom listened, his gaze fixed on the skull throne. He didn't hesitate because of fear or indecision. He hesitated because he found the offer familiar in a way that puzzled him. Why did beings who called themselves gods always present their bargains the same way? "I refuse." He said it plainly, without theatrics. The voice from the throne took on a note of surprise and sudden urgency. "You were about to speak the oath and swear yourself to the gods. Why refuse now? Do you think I doubt my end of the bargain?" The throne pressed. "No." Doom shook his head and a frank smile crossed his face, open and unguarded. "I wasn't going to say it just now either. I was stalling, taking the time to observe the scene." A long silence stretched out from the throne. Khorne, seated upon the skull throne, said nothing. Slowly it dawned on him and his divine brothers that they had been outplayed by a Primarch scarcely 3 months old. There was no anger in Khorne's silence. If anything, he was pleased. Courage and cunning, those were what he prized. A creature who relied only on raw strength was, to Corning, little more than a simpleton. I possess the authority of a warrior. Trust me, and your path will outstrip all who came before, surpass every predecessor, and leave no successors. I can make you the greatest warrior. Corn would not relent. The brass throne probed him, pushing, cajoling, trying to bend Doom to its will. No. Doom shook his head, rejecting the Skull Throne's promise. My upbringing and what I know now tell me you're wrong. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. To be a warrior, you must have a strong heart, the courage to challenge the strong, unshakable confidence, and stubborn defiance. A warrior's glory must be won with his own hands. It cannot be granted by someone else. You're calling yourself the god of warriors, he went on, voice steady. So tell me this, god of warriors, do you expect me, about to walk the warrior's path, to kneel and submit to you? His clear voice, like pearls falling, silenced the Skull Throne. In Khorne's domain within the warp, the blood god's wild laughter rolled through the heavens and the earth, and every demon fell prostrate. They glanced at one another, puzzled. None of them understood why their lord was pleased. How could they comprehend such joy? Khorne was pleased because of the boy. Courage to challenge the strong, unwavering confidence, unyielding defiance. Look at what he said. Khorne loved him for it. The boy had not kowtowed before a god, but neither had he been arrogant or hypocritical. He lived by his words, distrusted unfamiliar gifts, and had a clear, singular understanding of his own path. Even before any formal warrior training, he had grasped what mattered most to a warrior. The blood god's satisfaction was bitter and conflicted. Such is the nature of the ruinous powers. They hunger for pure, shining souls, yet they are paradoxical beings. Khorne dreamed of taking every spirit that dared to resist, and at the same time he wanted those same spirits to swear him with a defiant no. To refuse a god is itself a kind of glory. Those who say no to a deity display a courage and defiance unlike any other. I don't want to be a warrior. That's the life my father planned for me. In a deserted pocket of space facing the brass skull throne, Doom finally spoke the truth he'd kept buried. He did not crave glory or crowns. Compared to being a warrior or a king, he would rather travel and tend the land. Farming and wandering called to him more than battle ever had. The skull throne shuddered, anxious and relentless, trying to correct him. How can you refuse to be a warrior? It intoned, voice like grinding metal. How dare you disappoint your father's hopes? Never disappoint your father. You must become a glorious warrior. Doom spread his hands and with a solemn face answered what the throne wanted to hear. I am walking the path of a warrior. The skull throne trembled and relief washed through its booming voice. Never stray from your path. Then, above the warp skull throne, Khorne stirred, the blood god waking to the commotion. If Nawick had ordered Doom to swear himself to the blood god, the ritual's chances of success would have been far greater. Doom revered his father. He would never deliberately defy the course Nawick had set for him. When Doom's soul slipped free of the warp, it still carried an automatic defense, a self-protection that shut out the messages the gods tried to send. The divine voices grew more and more frustrated as Doom matured. The larger he became, the harder it was for the warp to reach his soul. Khorne, however, understood this and brightened at the revelation. Doom felt the sigil on his chest burn hotter and hotter. The little pocket of space-time around him was beginning to unravel. He took his leave of the skull throne as one might take leave of an old companion. Khorne sensed the same thing. The tiny world was under intolerable strain, the pressure of the warp and reality pulling it apart. I must go as well, the blood god said. No sooner had he spoken than the pocket realm shattered. Doom's soul snapped back from the blood god's domain into the material universe, while Khorne's will receded into the vastness of the warp. The blood god swept his gaze across the real world and fell upon King Nawick, a stubborn, battle-hardened ruler. Khorne liked him immediately. I'll speak to your father, Doom. You are meant for me, he snarled. Then his attention dropped to another figure, a man on his knees, hands clasped, begging the gods for mercy. Khorne recognized him at once, another pawn of Tzeentch. It's time to speak with my brothers and see what gift Tzeentch has prepared for Doom. Doom's vision went black again. When he next sensed his surroundings, the orc's corpse still twitched, and the Night Watch's praises rose and fell as before. Time itself seemed not to have moved a single step. Doom's face was bewildered, as if everything that had happened was a dream, except it felt painfully real. "An incredible strike!" the champion swordsman exclaimed, stepping forward and gripping Doom's shoulder with an excited hand. Perfect timing, landing the most effective blow at the exact right moment. Harlan's sweeping move had unbalanced the short, squat orc. Riding the momentum of the rotation, he drove his left fist upward as the creature fell. The blow crushed the orc's fragile facial bones and smashed through to its brain. Simple, brutal efficiency that killed instantly. It was breathtaking in its directness. Harlan then slapped Doom across the shoulder with a large, commanding hand. The force jolted Doom back to himself. "Little one! Little one! Little one!" Harlan shouted, urgent and almost jubilant. Doom's senses snapped back. He heard the orc's whistles and rising cheers. "Champion swordsman!" Echoing through the clearing. Blood from the fallen orc spattered down Doom's face. He let a slow, unsettling smile spread across his features. "Has the image of me in your heart changed?" he asked softly. Harlan's expression grew serious. His movements tightened with formality. "Doom, third prince," he said, voice measured and respectful. Harlan pressed his left hand flat to his heart and dipped into a small, respectful bow. "I'm ashamed I underestimated you," he said. "I shouldn't have judged you by the standards of ordinary men." It was a warrior's gesture, sincere and direct. Doom answered, "Your apology is accepted," and reached out with both hands to steady Harlan's tall frame, looking him squarely in the face. Handsome, scarred by battle. "But don't worry about it. I am an anomaly beyond your comprehension, something the world has never seen before." Harlan blinked. He hadn't expected that kind of strength, Doom easily helping him back upright. After a moment's thought, he exhaled, relieved. "Then I suppose I need to learn more about you, so I can judge more accurately in the future." Doom's gaze swept over the night watch lining the edge of the arena. His voice carried authority. "You aren't the only one who needs to learn," he said. "Everyone does. I am Doom Novik, third son of Nowik. I am destined to walk the path of a warrior. You must get used to me, learn to understand me, so you can fight at my side." He spoke calmly, full of energy but without a trace of triumphal pride, just a simple statement of fact. The Night Watch felt something stir at his words, a radiant, open confidence that seemed to shine from within him. The proud warriors, who had stood aloof a moment before, were swept up by it. Any contempt in their eyes vanished as they answered solemnly in unison, "Then we will wait for you on the battlefield, Destroyer Warrior." At the edge of the arena, King Nowik nodded again and again, clearly proud of the young man before him. "Look at him," he murmured to Queen Daisy. "You've taught him well. He's sharp, and he knows his goals." Queen Daisy smiled. "He's proved himself with his actions. He's put to rest the locals' mistrust of outsiders, and has fit into the warrior community faster than anyone expected." Nowik's eyes were distant with certainty. "Mark my words, he will step onto the battlefield. He is destined to become a leader." "The Night Watch will carry what they've seen and heard today out to the frontier," King Nowik said. "Before long, everyone will know there is an extraordinary prince among us. He'll make people look forward to him," he continued. "Some will trust him the moment they meet him. He'll become a story people pass along, a man everyone talks about." Satisfaction deepened in the king's eyes. He had grown fond of this son who had fallen from the sky. Where there had once been only vague anticipation, his feelings were now plain to see. Queen Daisy's lips curved into a gentle, proud smile. "Just don't call him too calculating," she said. "He's very good." Nowik rose and took his wife's hand, helping her to her feet with a flourish. "Being calculating is a mem of wisdom," he replied. "When used for good, it's a virtue. The enemies he'll face are unlike anything we've seen. To defeat them, he'll need both strength and cunning." He gave her a serious look. "Sometimes we must compromise. We may need to be harsher and trickier than our foes to overcome them. Then let's go, my queen." They had come to witness his victory and to witness the Watch's vow. Queen Daisy laid her hand against King Nowik's armored forearm. Together they were the romance of iron and roses, resilient and gentle, solemn and elegant. "Champion swordsman, Harlan Ogilvy," the herald announced. Nowik's heavy, commanding voice rolled out over the gathered throng, taking on the ritual cadence, fulfill your promise." Doom watched with a knot of nerves. His father, a man he had long revered but never before seen, approached at his mother's side. For a moment, Doom's heart hovered in his chest. Only when he met the steady comfort and quiet affirmation in his father's eyes did it finally calm. Every child wants his father's approval, even Doom, a Primarch forged by the Emperor. To be acknowledged by a father and loved by a mother is a simple, profound joy. "Give me a ceremonial longsword," Harlan called to the Night Watch, stepping forward to take the vow. In the main defense territory, once a recruit completes training, the first formal duty is to swear the Watch's oath. Their first pledge is to Nur. The Night Watch vows to guard its purity and peace, even unto death. The second object was King Nawick himself, the man to whom they pledged lifelong loyalty. Most members of the Night Watch swore only two vows: absolute fidelity to King Nawick and the protection of Nur. Only a rare few swore themselves to individuals with the right to receive such oaths, the princes of the Nawick dynasty or the queen, becoming that person's personal guard. They were free to choose a master they deemed worthy, provided that serving them did not harm Nur or violate the rules of the dynasty. Harlan had asked for a ceremonial longsword to mark his pledge to the third prince. "No need," King Nawick said, brushing back his cloak. From his waist he drew a simple sword hilt, a practical weapon rather than an ornamental one, and held it out as witness to the vow. "Take it, son." Harlan, called Doom by some of his comrades, reached for the hilt with hands that trembled slightly. The grip was still a little too large for him. In that solemn moment, everyone fell into their appointed places. The Night Watch, functioning as military honor guards, stood to the left, their spears planted and their dimension-light blades glowing faintly, lending the ceremony a pale, steady illumination. Scholars, serving as civil officials, stood to the right with their hands folded inside their robes, eyes closed and heads bowed. Queen Daisy brushed the blood from Doom's face, straightened his clothes, and smoothed his disheveled hair. Everything was ready. King Nawick and Queen Nawick stood behind Doom, one to his left, the other to his right, while civil and military officers formed lines on either side. Harlan knelt on one knee. Despite his height, his long frame still met Doom's gaze. Doom's face was serious. He pressed the mechanism on the sword's hilt, and the king's battle blade unfolded, a brilliant blue blade of dimensional light, which he carefully rested on Harlan's left shoulder. Harlan Ogilvy, wearing battle-scarred white power armor, lowered his proud head as the champion swordsman and spoke the oath of allegiance to the prince. "In the name of the king's sword and the champion, witnessed by king and queen, I, Harlan Ogilvy, hereby swear this oath. My blood shall be your shield, guarding your safety. My sword shall be my vow, striking down your enemies. Loyalty above my very soul, honor weightier than life itself. Your will shall be my guide, your enemies shall be my mortal foes. This oath is forged in steel forever, this heart stands firm as the stars. Until my last breath, until my sword is broken, my soul will keep this vow." Arlan intoned the words with steady certainty. When he finished, Doom swept his lightsaber in an arc above Harlan's head and laid the blade across his right shoulder, then spoke in a low, solemn voice. "I, Doom Novick, accept your oath. I accept your loyalty." Unseen by them, far away in the churning warp, the blood god smiled. He favored warriors, and when he sensed the fervor in this pledge, he granted his blessing without reservation. "My lord, what will be my emblem?" Harlan asked. By custom, a guard sworn to the royal household received a personal emblem from a member of the royal family to seal the bond. Doom had none. Under the laws of the main defense territory, he was still legally a newborn and had no family device to give. He hesitated. "Doom, how about this?" Queen Daisy's gentle voice answered. She stepped forward, peeled back Doom's robe, and revealed the blood-red runic mark burning on his chest. Doom met Daisy's gaze, and she nodded. "That will do," she said. "It was born with me. It's the most fitting personal emblem." An unexpected duel changed everything. Because of the terms they had set, the champion swordsman found himself bound to serve the victor, and when Doom won, the swordsman became Doom's personal guard. At the time it seemed only a strange twist of fate. Only much later, when he set out on his campaign to conquer the stars, did the champion belatedly understand what had really happened. Everyone had known how it would end. The king and queen had expected Doom to win, and Doom himself knew he would win. King Nawick had dug the pit, and, curiously, jumped into it of his own accord. Chapter 28. You Need to Be Strong. The walk from the arena back to the royal palace felt long. The warrior arena, the emblem of the warrior tradition, sat at the far end of Royal Palace Avenue, in the heart of the main defense territory. Almost every other building clustered around it. The avenue itself was a pure, solemn white, its sides cut with massive carved murals that told the Night Watch's rise from the fallen old night, a step-by-step chronicle of how they drove back the darkness with their deeds. Doom rode on Nawick's shoulders as they moved down the king's corridor, which was laid with a single strip of blue carpet, an exclusive passage that ran down the center. The champion swordsman, carrying the orc's corpse, walked beside them along the adjacent warrior avenue. The king's corridor was reserved for the king and the prince alone. Not even the queen was allowed to set foot on it. Lining the corridor were statues of the successive kings named Nawick, their faces grave and their gazes fixed straight ahead, seeming to scrutinize the descendants who passed beneath them. The royal palace, seen in the distance, was pure white. Indeed, the entire main defense territory gleamed that same immaculate white. The stone used to build the city was native to Nur, abundant in the quarries, flawlessly white, astonishingly hard, and quarried in enormous blocks. Many of the structures that looked impossibly massive could have been carved from a single monolith. After an artificial intelligence sealed the planet, the human survivors learned to survive on Nur's resources. They raised stone fortresses, forged weapons from null crystal, and rearmed themselves any way they could. Stubborn and resolute, they preserved the legacy of their civilization. The white facades spoke of perfection. The blue circular domes and the towering vertical crystal portholes spoke of a warrior's clear, uncompromising soul. This distinctive architectural aesthetic, passed down for millennia, perfectly fused martial purpose with humanistic feeling. Feeling the cool metal of his power armor against his inner thighs, Doom fought to keep his face calm. Inside, though, his heart was churning. King Nawick cradled Doom's legs with both hands as he carried him along the king's corridor, the passage reserved only for the sovereign and his heir. "Nervous, Doom?" the king asked. Doom felt the odd stiffness in his legs and the small weight of the child on his shoulders. The boy's back was tense, and his arms didn't know where to go. He managed a single trembling sound. Then quieter. "I never thought you'd acknowledge me, or accept me." Nawick lifted his hand and motioned for Doom to lay his in it. The king's large hand closed over the child's small one. Even through the gauntlet, Doom felt the firm warmth. "Because of your differences? Because of what you are and how you behave?" Nawick asked. Doom tightened his grip, afraid the warmth would slip away. "I saw the amniotic pod," he said, voice shaking, on the edge of a sob. "It's an artificial womb, sorcery and technology together. I'm an anomaly, created." He clung to his father's hand as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. Nawick held on equally tight, never letting go. Harlan realized, with a quiet certainty, that no matter how quickly Doom grew or how much he learned, anxiety would always live inside him. Doom was afraid of himself. He feared his own talent and the extraordinary nature that set him apart. Doom's voice was hoarse and on the verge of breaking. "Do you know? I am a creator, and I don't even know the one who created me. Is he good or evil? Why did he make me?" His words came out cramped and urgent. "If one day my creator stands before me and orders me to do something terrible, can I refuse him?" Stationed along the warrior road, Harlan strained to hear the exchange between father and son. He bowed his head and smiled. In that moment, he knew he had chosen the right man to follow. His sworn master, however extraordinary his gifts, was essentially kind and gentle. Tears were not a sign of weakness. They were the expression of someone terrified of his own strength and of the harm it might cause. That depth of compassion was a harbor worth dying for. Then Nawick stopped. He slipped an arm around Doom's waist, steadying him, and gently set him down before himself. Doom's eyes were rimmed red, and deep in those black pearl-like pupils there was a raw, trembling fear. Nawick's normally majestic, square face had softened. Tenderness touched him in a way Doom had rarely seen. Nawick ran his hand through Doom's thick black hair, then let it trail down across his shoulders, along his ribs to his waist, and finally over his thighs and calves, as if reassuring him with the whole sweep of his touch. "You're no different from any of us," Nawik said quietly. 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 shoulders holding up a head. He crouched in front of Doom and cupped the back of his neck in his broad hand. "Son, use that extraordinary mind of yours. Tell me, why were you made?" Doom went silent. He had turned that question over 1,000 times and had never found an answer. Why had he been created? Why did he drift through the cosmos? What purpose, what mission had been set for him? He clung to the small comforts of the present because the future felt like a void. His thoughts tore themselves apart in endless struggle. He was afraid to look for the truth, afraid that if he did, the answer would prove his origin was dark and his future colder still. Nawik looked at him with a light in his eyes that was almost tender. "Look at you," he said. The warmth in that look was like a candle in the dark, steady and guiding, reaching out to pull Doom forward. "I don't know who made you, but he made you beautifully." Nawik eased off his heavy gauntlet and for the first time truly touched his son. He felt the young fervor beneath the skin, the steady heat of life. His large hand, knuckles scarred and calloused from years of sword work, moved across Doom's face with a tenderness that belied its strength. Every plane of his son's features felt deliberate, as if a devoted artisan had poured his whole heart into shaping muscle and bone. Every inch of that skin mattered. Every contour was a crafted work of art. He lingered, as if committing the image to memory. He had hoped, in some private way, that his creation would be like him, great, glorious, revered, a living guide for others to follow. "Compared to you," he said softly, "our ancestors, those who survive now only in history, and even the magnificent image of the Golden Men, are nothing." "Your face is what people worship," Nawik added. "It fits every imagination of what a great leader should look like." Doom listened without interrupting, weighing his father's words. Nawik's voice deepened. The question that followed was the sort that could change a life. "If you were made for slaughter and for ending things," he asked, "then why did he make you so glorious?" Doom's reply was quiet, steady as a blade being drawn. "The galaxy is vast," he said. "There are countless terrifying things out there. It is filled with countless life forms, inhabited by innumerable aliens. Why did he choose humanity as the template?" Nawik pressed on, gently clearing the fog that had settled over his son's heart and steering him toward the root of his tangled questions. "Answer me." Doom looked up at his father. Moisture rimmed his eyes, and a smile broke across his face. "The Creator is human," he said, excitement lighting his voice. Nawik's face brightened at the answer. "Yes, or at least human, perhaps a group of humans, filled with ambition." He nodded, then elaborated for his son. "He, or they, made you, and possibly your brothers as well. They fashioned you to be magnificent and powerful, natural leaders meant to rally humanity and to offer it remarkable guidance." Nawik's careful reasoning, unraveling the mystery thread by thread, began to reconstruct a version of the truth. Far across the stars, the Emperor could never have guessed that a father, with uncommon insight, had managed to glimpse a corner of his design. "You can't choose the circumstances of your birth," the king said, his voice calm and commanding, "but you can choose how to live." He guided Doom out of the swamp of confusion with steady words. "But what if, father?" Doom's cloudy expression cleared into a new unease. "What if?" "Then you grow stronger," King Nawik replied, blunt and uncompromising. "Strong enough to resist anything. When someone tries to force you into their will, when they try to enslave you, look them in the eye and tell them, 'Get lost. Stay far away from me.'" Doom laughed then, a genuine, unreserved laugh. His handsome face flushed, joy lit his eyes. At the king's coarse outburst, Harlan nearly burst out laughing too, but managed to choke it back, taking a sharp breath to steady himself. King Nawik relaxed into an easy smile. For a moment he abandoned the trappings of majesty and was simply a father offering guidance. "Only by becoming strong do you earn the right to choose your future," he said. He patted his son's shoulder. "Now go. Get the barbecue and the mushroom soup ready. I have many things I must attend to." Wrapping his cloak about him, he rose and walked toward the throne hall. In that instant, he was both ruler and father. Doom, accompanied by his newly recruited champion swordsman, hauled the commando kid's corpse back to camp to prepare the long-awaited mushroom meal. Chapter 29. Face the Gods. As Doom departed, Nawick crossed the throne hall. The relaxed smile he had worn in private fell away. In its place was the austere dignity of a ruler. Civil and military officials stood in neat ranks along the sides of the hall, each lowering themselves to one knee before the king. While Nawick had been gone for 3 months, Queen Daisy had handled the affairs of state, and she had done so admirably. Only a few minor details had slipped through, nothing that could not be fixed. He acknowledged that silently as he passed his counselors. When the formalities were over, Nawick shed his armor and retired to his study. He sat behind the heavy stone desk, fingers drumming a slow, restless rhythm on the surface as he considered what he had learned. A king must see farther than ordinary men. He must notice the small, suspicious things everyone else overlooks and read the danger beneath a calm face. Doom's parting words had given Nawick a new line of thought. The exchange between father and son rang like a warning in the king's mind. The son who had fallen from the sky brought more than promise. He had carried with him unexpected enemies and new conflicts. Nawick was king of the Night Watch, sworn to find those who would threaten his realm. He was also a father. Both roles pulled him in the same terrible direction now. He had to find the enemy, and he had to discover who was plotting against his son. Doom's arrival had not been an accident. If anything, Nawick thought, the real accident was that he had been the one to find him first. The one undeniable fact they had uncovered was that Doom had been made by humans. Everything else, how, why, who, opened up 1,000 questions. Who would cast this human-made creation into the void, sending him adrift until he washed up on Nur? Nothing like Doom had been seen even in the old, glorious days. Nawick refused to believe that humanity had somehow reassembled, reclaimed its scattered domains in the void, and rebuilt technology beyond its former peak. Nor did he believe a weapon of Doom's magnitude would simply be discarded, as if its makers didn't care whether it was lost. The incidents around Doom seemed at once unrelated and connected, as if an invisible thread tied them together. 4th shelf, 13th column, 21st book, he told his attendant. He would look for answers in the old texts, those sealed, forgotten stores of knowledge that might explain what no one else could. Send everyone out. Tell the guards, no one is to enter until I come out. The attendant hurried away. Nawick opened the book and ran his finger down the index, searching for the term that would unlock the rest. His finger stopped. The phrase jumped off the page. Warp energy. What stunned the Night Watch most was that something had pierced Nur's shield. Nur's dimensional barrier, powered by the giant crystals of the newer ring, did not simply block things. The ancients had converted the entire planet into a kind of pocket, pulled it out of the normal universe so it could still bask in starlight, but remain visible yet untouchable. Under that system, ordinary objects, even a planet of equal mass, wouldn't collide with Nur. They would phase through and drift away as if passing through a ghost. By that logic, Doom's amniotic sac should have missed Nur entirely and continued into deep space. Instead, impossibly, it struck down and landed on the planet, an outcome as absurd as anything an orc might contrive. There was a pattern to the orc's arrival. When the horde gathered, they generated a peculiar field that warped physical law. The Night Watch realized the meteorite bringing Doom must have carried that same field, an exotic property that allowed the orcs to breach Nur's dimensional defenses. King Nawick, clear-eyed and curious, understood the implication. What was forbidden or impossible in the real universe could be achieved through the warp. As he studied the old, outlawed texts and the forbidden knowledge they contained, the knot of doubts in his mind began to loosen. DS of explanations started to weave themselves together, and a new, frightening picture emerged. Nawick dipped his quill and wrote warp energy across a scrap of paper. He had been thinking about Doom. When it detached from the warp, the amniotic sac around it had been charged with such violent warp energy that even a small object could tear through dimensions and fall into Nur. He set the quill down, picked it up again, and on the other side of the paper wrote a single name opposite warp energy. Isaac. Isaac, the high priest of the City of Truth. How could he possibly have known Doom was coming? Nawick didn't believe in seers or psychic prophecy. Nur was an independent dimension, cut off from the outside. Prophecy required cause and effect, and Nur answered to no external timeline. Still, the things Isaac had said on the day of the siege came back to him in a rush. Nawick's face went hard. In the corner of the paper, he added one more word: God. As he finished the last stroke, the desk beneath the sheet began to vibrate. A dark liquid bled from the letters, and the little words seemed to twist as if alive. The air around him dropped suddenly, the room growing cold. A psychic reaction, Nawick realized. His own will, honed and razor-sharp, was feeding it. He slammed his palm down onto the paper to smother whatever had been woken. The impact was a concussive blow. The force split stone. The desk cracked where his hand hit, a web of fractures running across its surface. "Get out of here!" Nawick roared. His iron will snapped the psychic intrusion apart, and with a curt wave, he sent the guards waiting outside the study back to their posts. "Humph. Hypocritical illusion," he sneered. The Night Watch had faced powerful psychics for years. They knew how to fight psychic tricks. Nawick's contempt showed he was certain of his method. He didn't fear a reaction. He feared silence. Confident the test had worked, he picked up his quill and wrote in the last corner of the page, "Creator." He meant Doom's creator. Everything on the sheet traced back to Doom, so he put the word Doom in the center of the four elements. With all 5 words on the paper, Nawick's mind snapped clear. He understood it all. He was only one step away from the truth. But before he could make that final connection, the study lurched. Not just the room. The entire building was seized and flung, vibrating and flipping as if it had been thrown into a giant tumble-dryer. Bookshelves toppled, and 100 volumes sprang open, pages flipping in a space that seemed to have no up, down, left, or right. Whoosh, whoosh, the sound of turning pages piled on itself like waves, washing over Nawick's ears. Book covers warped and sprouted eyes. Their rolling pupils stared him over and over. Sheets of paper gaped into mouths lined with stark white fangs, chanting and clamoring, vomiting out an incomprehensible tsunami of noisy knowledge. For most people, the sight would have been horrifying. For a warrior, it was simply strange. Nawick sat where he had been, expression calm, watching the supernatural riot with an almost clinical interest. He was a reef in a storm, unmoved amid the chaos. No tremor of fear touched his face as the world spun, and one peculiar phenomenon followed another. "Put away your humble illusions. These petty tricks cannot shake me." A deep voice thundered, cutting through the clamor and laying bare the illusion's true nature. In an instant, the study stilled, as if nothing at all had happened. In the ever-shifting crystal labyrinth of the warp, Tzeentch slipped a long, silent neck through the curtain of reality and watched the man at the stone table, a man playing what looked like a deceptively simple connect-the-dots game. King Nawick's revelation of the truth had echoed into the warp. The answers he sought were tangled up with the gods themselves. Secrets about deities are, by their nature, extraordinary. Tzeentch, the Lord of Schemes, quickly took note of this mortal in the material world who kept peeling back the veil of truth. He plucked casually at a strand of fate and glimpsed Nawick's past, a history of glory and deep wisdom. He could not, however, see the man's future. Nawick's destiny was tightly bound to Doom's. Mortal wisdom can also reach the divine. The thought slipped through the labyrinth like a curious wind. A long sigh, equal parts approval and unease, rippled through the crystal halls. Tzeentch decided to make himself known. When his power pierced the veil and spilled into the real world, a peculiar ritual concerning him quietly took shape. Nawick watched as the 9th book on the 9th row of the 9th bookshelf by the wall was tugged free by an unseen force and hovered in the air, suspended between worlds. Though he could not make out its shape, every glance at the book radiated an elegant certainty, and the sound of its pages turning was soft and harmonious. When the pages fell to the 9th, the sacred number of Tzeentch, a voice suddenly filled the study. He spoke. "Mortals are always audacious, attempting to fathom great destiny. Of course, I warmly welcome the thirst for knowledge in wise souls." Chapter 30. Confrontation with God. What reached King Nawick first was the hoarse cry of a crow, like someone coughing with phlegm lodged in their throat. The sound held a scorn that dismissed everything else, yet it carried an almost sincere invitation. It wasn't me who sought out these so-called deities. I have no interest in you or your kind. Your reach went too far when you touched my son. The voice belonged to the true master at last. Nawick lifted an eyebrow. He had never expected his line of reasoning to uncover something so profound, the existence of a god. Still, he didn't accept that label. He pegged the speaker as a unique being, perhaps an immensely powerful psychic beyond ordinary human understanding, not some divine entity. Your son? Nawick echoed, intrigued. The rasping voice made a mocking, coughing, quah-quah sound, like a consumptive patient gasping for breath. He is a divine scion. How dare a mortal like you overstep? Oh, Nawick allowed a small smile. The being opposite him did not seem unwilling to share information, which only gave him more to work with. Then where is his divine father? Whatever truths the owner of the book had disclosed, Nawick received them with stark disbelief. He was certain of one thing. Doom was not a divine scion. Nawick tested the idea in his head. The talking book hovering before him was the best possible proof. If gods truly existed and were omnipresent, any thought that touched them would alert them, and they would manifest. If that were true, Doom's father should have shown up the moment the thought reached him. He hadn't. The book circled him once, emitting an approving little hum. Your mind is sharp, good at sorting truth from falsehood, it said. I like clever people. I reward them. Ask a few questions, and I will answer. It climbed higher, looking down at King Nawick with the smug proprietorial air of a superior being. He smiled faintly and without hesitation declined. I don't want to ask questions, he said. You don't want to seek the truth? The book asked, genuinely puzzled. I'm already close enough to it, Nawick replied. I don't need guidance from an unknown thing like you. The book's voice, thin and reedy, like a chronic cough, kept prodding, trying to bait his curiosity. There's more to know. I don't need much, Nawick interrupted calmly. He regarded the offer with frank indifference. What could answers to a stranger's questions reveal that he didn't already suspect? What answer does it give to everything? He had come for one thing, to learn who had become his son's enemy, and the book had already answered. The more he knew, the easier it seemed to be misled. People mistake spotlighted truths for whole truths. Sometimes something in the shadows is simply showing you what it wants you to see. Knowing when to stop asking, he told himself, was sometimes the clearest course. I am just a father who misses his son. Nothing more, he said aloud. I don't want to untangle your chaotic god's schemes. The pages rustled and spat a sneer. A father protecting his child? How flattering of you to think so. You raised him, poured your beliefs into him, the book continued, its voice like wind through paper. But in the end, it was only because you wanted to use him, to fulfill your clan's long-cherished wish. Nawick laughed out loud. Ha! Now I believe you are a god, a ridiculous god of farce. He shot the book a look that was half contempt, half admission. You're right, I did have those thoughts. He stepped closer, tone sharpening. Tell me this, then. Where do Doom's achievements truly lie? On this planet, or in the vast, star-strewn ocean beyond? The book fell silent for a beat. Nawick's answer came low and sure. He's a whale beached in a harbor. When the tide of destiny rises, the voice intoned, cool and distant, he will return to his ocean. We are no more than passengers on his back, hitchhikers riding the whale home. Doom, isn't he my son? Someone demanded. Nawick flared at the accusation, answering the contempt with a B. Lunt, undeniable claim. He reads my thoughts and feels my will. He accepts the expectations I place on him, drinks in everything I teach, walks the path I planned, inherits my work, and will surpass me. Is that enough? The voice sneered. The book on the desk lifted as if of its own accord. Its cover split open, and a single giant eye, ringed with 9 pupils, swiveled to fix him. Its scrutiny was cold and absolute. There is no blood between you. You are nothing but an unexpected passerby in his life. Are these so-called gods really that shallow? Nawick asked, disappointment cooling into something harder. He shook his head, meeting the unblinking gaze. Bloodlines may thin and die out with time, but the legacy hammered into a soul does not vanish. A slow smile of recognition crept across his face. He slapped his forehead, suddenly bemused by his own delay in seeing it. I know. He fixed the floating book with a sudden, serious look. His pitying expression made it inexplicably flustered. You have no children, he said. You can't know that aching anticipation in a parent's heart. Of course you wouldn't understand. The air dropped into a deathly silence. The book, hovering in midair, faltered for a beat before righting itself. In the warp, Tzeentch's perpetually shifting form stuttered almost imperceptibly, and the light that played across the crystal labyrinth paused as if held in a single breath. The Lord of Change, master of schemes, god of wisdom, mocked by a mortal and told he did not understand the bond between father and son. The single eye on the book's cover snapped open in fury. "Mortal, wipe the filth from your eyes," it hissed. The voice that spilled from the pages warped into a shriek. "I am the Lord of Change. I am the God of Wisdom. I perceive all destinies. I know all secrets." Tzeentch's divine form convulsed. A dark, sharp temper flared through him, and his voice thundered from the book. "I am the omniscient God, the Lord who knows all." "Yes," the book echoed, the word ringing like a challenge. "Exactly." King Nowak sneered, refusing to back down. He faced the figure behind the floating book and said, "Precisely because you're omniscient, you can't know what it means to hope for your son's future." Nowak shook his head sharply. The pity in his eyes deepened instead of fading. "Omniscience is a curse," he said. "It makes you know everything, and it makes you infinitely hollow." "You call yourself a god?" he went on. "If you know everything, do you even know what you want?" "I do," the warped book replied, vibrating violently. It twitched in midair and let out a frantic, piercing shriek. "No, you don't." Nowak rose to his feet, looking up. Even though the book floated high above them, his gaze pressed down with cold condescension, the pity in it almost physical. "Pathetic thing that calls itself God. For you, everything is predetermined, everything is as it should be." With a sudden crack, the one-eyed book burst into silent blue flames. This time, the so-called God did not answer. The ashes drifted down and settled on the desk, arranging themselves into letters that spelled King Nowak. "We will meet again." In the warp, the other Lords of Change dared not make a sound. Tzeentch had suddenly erupted into a fury, shattering a crystal etched with lost sorceries into glittering shards. For all his omniscience, Nowak had been right. Over those infinite years of change, Tzeentch had become hollow. His ever-shifting form reflected a god who did not even know what he wanted. Being called out by an unremarkable mortal stung him more than any bite from Nurgle. Nowak, a phantom of the man blossomed in Tzeentch's hand, a perfect projection. Every eye on the Lord's ever-changing body burned with rage. "Only one thing you said was wrong." Nowak's words echoed in the void. "When doom comes to the warp, his unpredictable destiny is not decided by the gods. I am very curious to see how far he can go." With a single gesture, Tzeentch conjured doom, caught in the mundane act of ring mushroom soup, into being beside the phantom of Nowak. The Lord's many fathomless eyes softened with a strange fondness. "No," he said, voice like shifting thunder. "His fate will be decided by the gods, by me. I am very much looking forward to how far you will go." He let both phantoms waver and vanish with a flick of his hand, then chuckled, a cold, sinister sound that rolled through the warp. "I need to talk to the other three. This man's wisdom is our biggest stumbling block." Nowak knew nothing about what was happening in the warp, and he had no desire to know more than necessary. He kept working, methodically tying pieces together on the board. Isaac linked to the so-called God. That God had been feeding Isaac hints, letting him anticipate Doom's arrival. Nowak drew another line from the God to the warp. The God had nowhere else to be. Only inside the warp could it draw the power it needed. Doom and the Creator were connected too. The primary relationship, the origin point from which everything began. And that raised the question, why would a warp god whisper to Isaac to deliver Doom's amniotic sac? The answer was ugly but simple. They'd torn Doom away from the Creator and wanted to claim him for themselves. He drew a thin line between the god and the Creator and scrawled one word above it, hostile. When he stepped back, the deductions stood stark and cold on the page. There was no triumph in reaching the truth. Nowak's face was flat and hard. He was alone in this fight, with no allies to lean on, and his son was surrounded. Predators circled, a pack of hungry wolves that wanted nothing more than to tear him apart and feast. Chapter 31. I'm in awe. What color is the night sky? On Nur, night feels like a dream. The stars seemed to vanish beyond the horizon while magnificent auroras, caught and amplified by the vast gemstone ranges that girdle the planet, washed the atmosphere in a slow, living light, forever draping the far half of the world in a luminous twilight. Beneath the third pillar of the newer ring sits the City of Truth, set directly across from the main defense territory. Wizards and warriors have been at odds for as long as anyone can remember. The difference between them goes deeper than strategy or spellcraft, cutting to the core of their beliefs. Warriors despise the faith of the wizards, seeing it as weakness. Only cowards, or the incompetent, they say, would kneel to some invisible god and beg for mercy. Wizards, in turn, scorn the warriors' crude certainties. To them, fighters are brutal and narrow-minded, slavishly bound to the warrior's law and blind to the higher truths of the universe. The architecture reflects that divide. The towers of the main defense territory rise in measured military order. The wizard towers in the City of Truth refuse such uniformity. They stand as individual statements, each different, some leaning at odd angles, some inverted, none matching another. Each tower a bold expression of the mind that shaped it. At the center of the city stands the tallest tower, its windows mismatched, its brickwork misaligned, every seam resisting symmetry. Strange distortions ripple through its structure, yet it somehow retains a peculiar, compelling beauty. Before one of the tower's shrines, Isaac knelt. He prostrated himself again and again, rising only to bow low once more, begging for forgiveness. He had failed the god's command. He had not returned the divine child who had descended from the sky. For 3 months a cold dread sat behind his ribs. He feared abandonment, terrified that the voice of the divine will would never speak to him again. He worshipped and repented without rest. His forehead was bruised from repeated prostrations, his back permanently bent, his lips cracked from endless prayers and hymns. Still there was no answer. Silence followed only fear and a deeper kind of terror. Once the city's elegant, composed high priest, Isaac had become a shadow of himself. He shuffled like a broken thing, humbled and frantic. He had been reduced in his own eyes and in the eyes of others to something like a favored dog cast into the gutter, filthy, reeking, yet still wagging its tail in supplication. Such are the 4 gods. Their love is not human. It cannot be measured by the terms that govern mortal hearts. It does not ebb because the beloved recoils in hatred or disgust, nor does it swell simply because worshippers cry out with fervor. Their ways of giving and withholding are other things entirely. Love and indifference alike are matters of mood for the gods. Their affections follow no logic. Humans worship them devoutly, yet the gods do not return that love, at least not in any straightforward way, and yet sometimes, in strange, inscrutable ways, they do. Isaac was a powerful psyker, and his fervent penance and constant worship had been noticed early by the 4 gods beyond the veil. They watched their faithful supplicant from the warp. How dull, thought Tzeentch. He regarded the mortal with an expressionless, bored gaze. No sorrow, no joy. To ordinary people, the high priest seemed full of wisdom. To a god, he was no more than a single-celled organism. "Aren't you going to answer him?" Slaanesh asked cautiously from beside Tzeentch. The Dark Prince extended a long, black tongue and lightly licked his lips. He smelled a complicated pleasure in the mortal's self-torment, a mingling of atonement and secret delight. "A lowly and useless pawn," Tzeentch said, dismissive. His finger brushed the void as if brushing dust from a tapestry, and he plucked a sliver of time from history. Within that stolen thread, Isaac was told, quietly, inexorably, to welcome the arrival of doom. The battlefield was a chaos of blood, and broken prayer. The high priest collapsed there, sobbing, soaked in gore. Before anyone else could move, King Noak lunged and seized Doom. Tzeentch's shifting form narrowed and reshaped itself into a single, enormous eye, fixed on the smiling, dog-headed form of Khorne. Lately, the blood god had been in an oddly good humor, and the change put Tzeentch on edge. He suspected Khorne of having secretly nudged events in his favor. The suspicion was not unfounded. Khorne's authority over warriors was absolute. He could influence a fighter's split-second impulse without rites or ritual. The flicker of decision in King Nauk's face had been magnified 1,000-fold by the raw presence of the 4 gods, and that infinitesimal advantage let the warrior king snatch Doom before Isaac could. "It wasn't me," Khorne protested, glancing up at Tzeentch. His unusually bright mood made him almost unwilling to ruin the moment. Tzeentch's great incarnate eye drifted away from Khorne to the lesser gods around them, and for now accepted the denial. In the warp, everyone knew the blood god relished schemes, but they also knew he never told a lie. "Why are you looking at me?" The lumpy form of Nurgle, who usually wore a benignant, simple serenity, lost that calm when he saw his arch-rival's gaze. Disgust creased his face as he spat the words. "Who is it that is fickle, and who is full of lies?" Tzeentch turned his eyes away. He knew it wasn't deliberate, looking was an unconscious thing, and he knew all too well that Nurgle's accusation did not require proof. Nurgle's power moved on a slow, plodding circuit. It needed time, a fixed cycle to complete its motion before it could be brought to bear. He did not act in whispers or sudden strikes. Nurgle hated Tzeentch and all the treacheries that he stood for, but he would not stoop to secret meddling. He would wait patiently at the finish line, and when the ripest moment came, he would pluck the fruit. The three other great gods then turned their attention to Slaanesh, the youngest of them all. In the warp, their authorities were at constant odds, each resenting the others for what they represented, but there was one who drew a special, almost unanimous loathing. Slaanesh. As the youngest, he embodied desire and indulgence, a ceaseless craving for sensation and excess. That very essence made the other gods despise him. Khorne's lust for slaughter and bloody honor had no place for decadent pleasure. Tzeentch's appetite for change, cunning, and secrets found Slaanesh's instant gratifications contemptible. Even Nurgle's steady, cyclical entropy mocked the feverish, unending craving of indulgence. All three turned on the fledgling god with the same hard, disapproving gaze. The savage joy a berserker felt in slaughter, the bright rush of revelation in a scholar's mind, Slaanesh would taint them both. Nurgle loathed Slaanesh more than any of the others, second only to his hatred for Tzeentch. Nurgle was decay, yes, but he also embodied the cycle of life. By enduring the pain of rot and loss, life could be renewed. Slaanesh to Nurgle was a sacrilege, turning necessary suffering into perverse indulgence, converting pain into pleasure, and robbing rebirth of the reverence it required. So Slaanesh was the first suspect. "It wasn't me." The Dark Prince's languid, decadent voice cut through the accusation, decisive and smirking. "That man's will is far too strong. He is a restrained warrior." Slaanesh hated warriors, especially disciplined ones. That hatred explained, in part, his ancient enmity with Khorne. Soldiers who followed doctrine and restraint were unusually resistant to corrupting desires. The four gods fell silent. All of them knew that King Nawick's embrace of doom hadn't been a simple lapse. Some power beyond their ken had interfered. "Was it he?" Slaanesh asked softly. "No. There are no traces of his power." Tzeentch's voice scraped like ice across glass as he shifted shape into a living crystal mirror. The surface bloomed with a panoramic view of Terra. "He is occupied, raising the Legion, unifying his homeland." The mirror warp twisted. Up close, it showed King Nawick bent over a desk in a lamplit study, ink and scrapings of arcane diagrams scattered around him. "No matter who it is," the reflection rasped, "now he already knows our purpose. If we want doom under our command," Slaanesh murmured, "he is the single greatest obstacle." Nurgle's vast, swelling belly split open and disgorged a tiny, fetid globe, the world of Nur reduced to a putrid marble that hung between them. The miniature pulsed with mildew and slow rot. "Nur's position is odd," Nurgle croaked, each word oozing. "Its place in the cosmos, the reality barrier there, very strong. It sits in another dimension, a long way from the warp. Our reach is weakened, our influence is blunted." Slaanesh's long tongue unfurled, the tip leaving a purple smear across the phantom of Nur as he toyed with the image. "Send an envoy," he purred. "A single ritual to plant an anchor. Once an anchor is fixed, distance will be meaningless to us, space will be nothing." The gods exchanged glances, an economy of power and purpose. With two nods, the four could make their intent one thing. Khorne's heavy, violent grin and Tzeentch's cold, scheming curl met Slaanesh's languid smile and Nurgle's sagging approval. Khorne and Tzeentch, who had long wished to have a good talk with King Nawick, inclined themselves without hesitation. The decision was made. An envoy would be sent, and the bridge between worlds would be forged. Tzeentch had taken humanoid shape. His slender, withered hand plunged into his own throat and drew out a dagger etched with arcane runes. Khorne seized it next. His blessing sank into the metal, a blood-hot heat that promised strength to whoever wielded it. Nurgle leaned forward, swallowed the blade, an obscene, gurgling motion, and the thing tasted of rot, its edge slick with the power of corruption. Slaanesh jeweled the moment with a flourish, spinning the dagger between nimble fingers and sewing into it a whisper of impossible skill and artistry. Now, Tzeentch chuckled, an insectile sound, goo-goo-goo-goo, and fixed his gaze on the priest, the small pawn before them. Isaac had lost count of how many times he'd prostrated himself and recited the prayers. Only sheer will kept him upright now, an exhausted supplicant begging the gods' forgiveness. In a faith that spanned millennia, he alone had been shown revelation, and he had let it slip away. He begged, humbly and frantically, for the god to look upon him again, to grant revelation once more. "Isaac, what are you willing to give?" came a voice, distant and impossibly close at once. Tranced, the high priest heard it like a call from the edge of the world. He bowed his head and sank down, prostrate on the stone, waiting. Tears of joy streamed down his face. His desperate pleas had finally reached the god. "I prostrate myself and offer my devotion. Take everything from me," he cried. "Though I have broken faith with you and have nothing left, by your mercy I give you all I have. I will no longer be myself," he went on, voice shaking. "I will be your apostle, your mouthpiece among mortals." He was willing to pay any price this time. He coughed harshly, then coughed again, choking on emotion. The god laughed, a sound like distant thunder and warm rain. "Then I will grant you everything," came the answer. "Do not disappoint us." Chapter 32. You need to become stronger quickly. The royal palace kitchen was a strange place to feel relief, but the champion swordsman let himself lean against the cool stone and breathe. He had been pulled back from the front lines. An attendant from the throne had delivered the order. His presence would not be required in the upcoming battles. From now on, his duty was to serve as a member of the personal guard, protecting the master to whom he had sworn his oath. Harlan was surprised by King Nowick's command, but he did not question it. A king's orders always carried purpose. He only needed to wait for the moment when that purpose would reveal itself. His eyes kept drifting to the busy figure at the chopping block. Doom, his oathmaster, was working with an almost surgical focus, skinning and boning the orc carcass, breaking it down into pieces suited to different methods of cooking. While Harlan's mind was tuned to tactics and victory, Doom's was entirely on the preparations before him. Which cuts would roast best, which would stew, which would be cured. What struck Harlan most was the precision of Doom's movements. Every slice was deliberate, every motion efficient. There was a discipline in his body that reminded Harlan of a fighter's training, only applied to a cleaver instead of a sword. Even in something as mundane as butchery, Doom's control was absolute, a quiet demonstration that strength took many forms. Doom's knife hand didn't tremble at all. He sliced the marbled fat and lean meat between the orc's abdominal muscles into pieces as thin as cicada wings. "Care for a taste?" he asked. He took a bowl of thick broth brewed from the orc's head, drank with a look of clear enjoyment, and offered it to his personal guard. In Nur, eating sentient species carried no moral stigma. In the distant past, during humanity's golden age, an empire centered on Nur had once wiped out an alien race simply because they were delicious. Harlan, Doom's sworn guard and a vassal of the Nowick royal family, was close to the court and wouldn't refuse an offered dish. Besides, his free-spirited nature made him curious. During the Wilderness War, the orcs had pillaged everywhere and fed on many of the wild tribes, so the flavor intrigued him. When the warm, rich broth touched Harlan's tongue, his eyes brightened. He swallowed, nodded, and couldn't help but admit that it was excellent. Only a pinch of salt had been used, just enough to bring out the orc meat's natural umami sweetness. The grassy scent of the mushrooms mingled with the meat's aroma into an oddly compelling fragrance. "Try this," Doom said. He rolled a slice of the translucent belly meat, dipped it in sauce, and offered it to Harlan. Harlan popped it into his mouth in one bite. The chilled fat softened with the warmth of his mouth and mingled with the tender meat. He closed his eyes in pleasure and gave Doom a thumbs up. For a moment he imagined that if he didn't become a warrior, he could easily conquer people as a chef. Seeing Harlan's obvious enjoyment, Doom couldn't resist. He rolled up a piece and swallowed it at once. Almost immediately, his expression changed. His face contorted, his whole body shuddered, and he clutched at his throat, spitting the meat back out. He let out a ragged breath through his nose, braced his hands on the chopping block, and shook his head repeatedly as if forcing himself to stay conscious. Harlan's face went white. He spat the meat out instinctively, convinced there might be poison in the orc's flesh. He thrust a hand to Doom's chest, checking pulse and breath, while one hand fumbled for the horn to call for help. His jaw was tight. If anything happened to his Oathmaster less than 2 hours into his watch, the stain on his reputation would be impossible to erase. Doom, head bowed, put up a hand to stop him from sounding the alarm. "Harlan Ogilvy," he said, his voice steady. "3 days ago, did you kick an orc with your left foot and knock it out with a guard spear?" Harlan didn't question why Doom asked. A guard obeyed orders. He ran the scene through his head, then answered without hesitation. "Yes." He let go of Doom and, almost automatically, demonstrated how he had immobilized the creature. When Doom got the confirmation, he waved Harlan off as if brushing away a needless concern. He looked faintly relieved. The reason for his alarm became clear. The moment he had bitten into that raw orc meat, fragmented, vivid scenes had flashed through his mind. Brief, immersive impressions that didn't feel like his own memories. He had only been testing whether those impressions matched any real event. Harlan's reply was all the reassurance he needed. A tall warrior in white armor had kicked him, and just as the man raised his spear for a sweeping blow, Harlan's vision had gone black. When he came to, he was already inside a cage. The memory of the attack flashed through him, sudden and sharp, and then it was gone. Doom smiled down at the bewildered Harlan. "It seems I have a curious talent," he said brightly. "By eating flesh, I can take on the memories of the one I consume." Harlan didn't press him about the heaven-sent child's divine powers. Everyone kept their secrets, but the look Doom had worn a moment ago had worried him. He forced the question he actually wanted answered. "Does it put any strain on your body?" Doom tapped his temple with a grin. "No, that strange expression was just a stress response, my brain receiving foreign memories for the first time. It won't happen again." To underline the point, he picked up a large chunk of unprocessed orc meat and began to chew, taking great, casual bites. There was none of the earlier disquiet. "Your Highness." Seeing Doom untroubled, Harlan let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and tried to steady the tremor in his chest. Harlan's face went unusually grave. "That kind of talent is dangerous," he told Doom. Doom frowned. "Why? Such an ability would be devastating in battle. Eat an enemy's flesh, and you could learn their movements, even their deployments. It was undeniably powerful." "I'm not talking about the battlefield," Harlan said, fixing Doom with a steady look. "Think about your comrades." Doom's smile vanished. With Harlan's hint, he understood just how terrible the gift could be. Everyone carried some darkness, some secret they wouldn't want anyone to know. If people believed you could gain memories encoded in their flesh by eating them, even the closest allies would put an unbridgeable distance between you and them. Who would trust you enough to bleed at your side? "I will keep this to myself and never tell anyone," Harlan said quietly. "I want you to do the same. Never reveal it, and only use it when absolutely necessary." Doom nodded solemnly, finally grasping the full weight of the champion swordsman's warning. "At the same time, I need to remind you," Harlan repeated, his voice taking on that hard edge of experience as he addressed his Oathmaster. "Use this ability as little as you can. Taking too many memories from others, even from other species, will stain you, no matter how carefully you try to cleanse your heart afterward," he warned. "As a warrior, if at the moment you draw your sword, those borrowed memories make you feel something different, cracks will open in your mental defenses, and if your mind is split, the sword in your hand will no longer be true." "I will remember your teaching, Harlan Ogilvy," Doom said, committing the warning to memory. He took the words of the champion swordsman seriously, lessons carved out of decades on battlefields. Harlan Ogilvy, the champion swordsman known as the Duelist, had built his reputation by hunting down enemy champions and forcing single combat. He had served in the Night Watch for decades and still stood, whereas every opponent who had faced him in those duels had died. Doom pressed him for more stories of the field. He listened closely, occasionally murmuring his admiration as Harlan recounted the hard truths of war. "Your Highness." Doom was in mid-conversation with his steward when an inner court maid slipped into the key room. "Queen Daisy requests your presence. She would like you to accompany her in bidding farewell to King Nawick." "So soon?" Doom asked, surprised. He had expected his father to linger a little longer, not depart within the day. "You don't understand how chaotic the battlefield is." Harlan, who stood nearby, already knew why Nawick was leaving. "As the orcs retreat, they keep gathering in new numbers," he said. "We can hunt them, and the knights can join the purge, but the orcs are tearing themselves apart from within. That breeds dangerous pockets of resistance. Someone must be on the field to command and steer the operations." Doom remembered how his sudden appearance had shattered the orc leadership, but there were still millions of greenskins on the rampage. Losing their chieftains had not left them helpless. Aside from the 1,000 warriors left to man the defenses, every other soldier had been sent out on the encirclement, relentlessly grinding down the orcs' remaining effective forces. He shook his head. It was a bitter waste to throw such an elite as the Night Watch into a war of attrition, but there was no choice. This was the Gate of Conquest. Whenever the main defense territory marched out, they left from here. Today, Doom stood by the Gate of Conquest with Queen Daisy and his second elder brother, waiting with the farewell crowd for King Nawick's troops to pass. "Where's Big Brother?" Doom murmured to Flano Novick, who stood at his side. "He's buried under paperwork," Flano whispered back. "All the logistics for the army fall on him." Before Doom could ask more, Queen Daisy gave both her sons a gentle tug on their sleeves. "Quiet," she warned. At the solemn Gate of Conquest, everyone bowed their heads. Some of the warriors leaving today might never come back. Nawick walked at the head of the column. When he reached Doom, he stopped, lifted his bewildered son into his arms, and leaned close enough for his voice to be only for him. "You must grow strong, quickly. We don't have much time." Then the king put his son down and looked at him with an expression Doom had never seen before. Raw, new worry etched into his face. As the expeditionary force moved away, Doom clenched his fists. His eyes flickered with thoughts he could not yet name. 33. Past grudges. The next day, after King Nawick departed, Doom's new lessons were put on the schedule. Doom walked beside his mother, his champion swordsman escort trailing a step behind them. Today Harlan, his champion, was dressed far more formally than usual. His pure white power armor, though scored with battle scars, had been polished spotless. Doom's personal emblem was engraved on the left breastplate, and the blue and gold guardian's cape that flowed from his shoulders was embroidered with the same sigil. Doom forced a blank expression, keeping his face neutral, but his eyes betrayed him, constantly flicking about in eager anticipation. They were headed for the War College. The War College was the backbone of the main defense territory, the place where the laws of war and the training of warriors were systematized and completed. 17-year-old youths who qualified entered to learn everything there was to know about warfare. After a minimum of 3 years of intense drills and a long, methodical period of psychological conditioning, they faced their graduation assessments. Those who passed emerged as warriors who could, even without power armor and unarmed, apply the intricate tactics they'd been taught to carry out missions in the harshest conditions. Warriors who had been through the psychological conditioning were cleansed of distractions. They did not allow themselves to be discouraged by failure, to swell with pride at success, to cower before a strong enemy, or to show mercy to the weak. The training forged a resolute mind, a high inner wall that shut out every superfluous thought that might undermine clear judgment. From the moment an apprentice graduated from the War College, he became a full Night Watch. They were Nur's keenest blades and its most unyielding bulwark. Each year, the War College supplied the Nawick dynasty with at least 500 soldiers to uphold the absolute military strength of the main defense territory. At its height, the Night Watch numbered 30,000 trained warriors, enough to sweep across Nur and put down every minor threat. Doom looked forward to the training with eager anticipation. Up until then, his mother had taught him with gentle patience, passing on hard-won experience, answering his endless questions without complaint. But, like every family in the main defense territory, she had one non-negotiable rule. He must obey her and not set foot in the War College until she gave her consent. The War College was a place defined by violence. Death, conflict, and destruction were its constant refrain. The main defense territory was proud of its Night Watch and deeply respected the warriors who defended the homeland, but that respect never became blind worship. While children were still impressionable, many mothers kept them away from the college's harsher sights. "Mom, isn't this the way to the command branch?" Doom asked as he followed his mother, and noticed they were off the expected path. By royal tradition, princes who entered the War College began in the command branch to study battlefield command, then moved on to other courses assigned by the crown or chosen for themselves. Queen Daisy smiled gently, her eyes full of tenderness, but she didn't answer. She took his hand and kept walking. When they reached their destination, Doom finally knew what his first branch would be. The training ground was alive with towering warrior apprentices, about 2.3 meters tall, roughly 7.5 feet, sparring and sweating as they pushed each other in martial drills. The apprentices fought in the training yard in nothing but shorts. No armor, no auxiliary gear, their tanned muscles gleaming in the sun as they crossed primitive swords and knives to decide the victor. "Your Majesty! Your Highness!" the younger men cried. They weren't there to pay formal respects, though. A bearded old man had pushed through the crowd and was approaching. He was handsome for his age, thick white hair combed back, a neatly trimmed beard, a deep, calm smile creasing his face. "Shilan, I haven't seen you in ages." Exclaimed, surprised, and ran forward to embrace him. This was Court Grand Swordsman Shilan. He had served the late King Nawick and later trained the present king. Nearly 300 years old, he was the dean of the dueling branch and responsible for teaching swordsmanship to the warrior apprentices. During the siege, he had stood at Nawick's side as the king's most trusted companion. He had been there at Doom's birth and had watched over the infant for several days. "Woo!" Shilan scooped Doom up as the boy bumped against his leg, smiling at the extra weight. "Little Doom, haven't seen you in a month, and you've sprouted again." Doom grinned back, unself-conscious around the older man. "Eat well, sleep well. Of course I'm growing." A harsh, rude voice cut across them. "Hey, old man!" Shilan's smile froze. He didn't like that voice. His face hardened with contempt as he looked toward its owner. "Well, if it isn't the savage swordsman Harlan," he said with a sour chuckle. Harlan sneered. "What, you're still breathing? Didn't think you'd last on the battlefield." Shilan returned the barb with a grin of his own. "Heh, don't count me out. I'll still be kicking even on the day you die of old age." Harlan shrugged and turned as if to walk away. The motion was casual, but it exposed the red emblem on the left side of his chest plate. Shilan's eyes narrowed. A lifetime of training had left him attuned to small details, and he noticed the emblem instantly. "How is that possible?" Shilan breathed, surprise breaking through his scorn. "Doom!" The court grand swordsman's face was grim as he dropped to one knee before him. "Did he use some underhanded trick to coerce you into taking him as your personal guard?" Doom stared, bewildered. He couldn't see the connection between the two of them. Before he could answer, Harlan made a small, triumphant sound. "Tsk, tsk, old man. You should see this." He produced a hollow projector from his belt and replayed yesterday's oath in perfect, three-dimensional detail. The projection left Shilan's expression shifting rapidly, from scorn to solemnity, then to a stunned, blank silence. Queen Daisy's footsteps were light. She didn't disturb the swordsman, but stepped in and gently took Doom by the arm. Doom looked at his mother, confused. Before he could speak, Daisy pressed a slim finger to his lips and gave him a conspiratorial wink. "Shh," she seemed to say. "Wait and see." Harlan stood a little straighter and opened his blue cape to display the emblem sewn into it. In a flash, Shilan's face went from livid to composed, the change complete in less than a second. Shilan smiled easily. "Congratulations, you now share the same honor as I do." He turned and walked to the edge of the training ground, picked up a wooden training sword from the rack, and tossed it in front of Harlan. "Come on, show me whether you're worthy of this task." Humph, afraid of you? Never. Harlan sneered, then barked toward the stands. Someone, disarm him. A match between a court swordsman and a champion swordsman drew immediate interest. Duels were commonplace in the dueling branch, and the apprentices hurried to their seats in the spectator stands, buzzing with anticipation at the prospect of watching two peak swordsmen face off. A few students hurried over to help Harlan strip out of his power armor. Doom frowned. He didn't understand what grudge Harlan had with Master Shi-Lan. It's complicated, Daisy said, looping an arm through Doom's and leaning close so only he could hear. Master Shi-Lan is a court swordsman, one of the best. He's your grandfather's personal guard, renowned for his swordsmanship and his many honors. Harlan Ogilvy is a brilliant swordsman and has a long list of honors. Daisy said, but he's not in the Royal Guard, always just one step short. The real reason for their feud is very, she hesitated, then chose her words carefully, complicated. As Daisy explained, Doom began to piece together the cause of the bitterness between them. He watched the two figures sparring on the training ground with bright, eager eyes. At the academy, Harlan had been an outstanding student. Shi-Lan had been his instructor and had taken a genuine liking to him. On the battlefield, Harlan cut down commanders and foes with a fierce personal style, and his victories had earned him the title of Swordmaster. That title carried a special privilege. A swordmaster could apply to have a holographic projection of their technique archived in the Royal Swordsmanship Collection to serve as a canonical reference for future generations, a prestige every grand swordsman spent a lifetime chasing. Harlan applied, but his submission was rejected. The reason was blunt and personal. Shi-Lan insisted that his method wasn't true swordsmanship. To her, it relied more on raw instinct and personal flair than on the disciplined form and principles that the collection preserved. That judgment, coming from his former teacher and admirer, was the root of their rivalry and mutual resentment. Royal family members should never learn that kind of swordsmanship, the kind that relies on instinct like a wild animal, Shi-Lan had said bluntly. Harlan bristled. As her student, he should have listened. Instead, he answered fiercely, humans are animals too, and princes and princesses are still human. In the heat of battle, a well-timed instinct could decide victory or defeat far more quickly than any textbook form. The argument between master and pupil became ugly, and in the end, they parted without resolving it. The rupture surprised their followers. Few expected two such measured people to quarrel so bitterly. Days later, anger finally got the better of Harlan. One afternoon, he posted himself outside Shi-Lan's gate and refused to leave, muttering and swearing to himself for 3 solid hours. He grew smug with each passing minute, convinced she would not have the nerve to come out and face him. He was wrong. Shi-Lan appeared behind him as calmly as if she had only just returned from the market, her arms full of vegetables. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. Then, without any fanfare, they silently agreed on a time and a secluded place for a duel, away from prying eyes. No one ever learned the exact outcome of that fight. What came afterwards, however, was telling. Shi-Lan would later concede on occasion that instinct could sometimes be effective, though not often, she always added. Harlan, for his part, admitted that conventional swordsmanship could occasionally produce unexpected results, but not often, he qualified. Their mutual hedging eased the tension among their followers. Everyone exhaled, relieved. It felt, at last, like the first step toward mending the rift between master and pupil. Things only got worse after that. Harlan had quietly married old man Shi-Lan's beloved granddaughter. When the girl stood before her grandfather, marriage certificate in hand, Harlan at her side, and declared that she would love only this man for the rest of her life, Shi-Lan, a man who had bled without ever shedding a tear, finally broke down and wept. He swept out of the house like a storm and hunted down the marriage registrar at the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He challenged the man to a duel and left him half dead. Before this, Shi-Lan and Harlan had been almost evenly matched. Harlan had always been slightly beneath him in rank and honor, and had been kept under Shi-Lan's thumb. But everything had changed when Harlan became a royal guard. His honor now stood on the same level as Shi-Lan's. He hadn't married the girl by accident. He had come for revenge. 34. Peak Showdown. On the training field, Harlan shrugged off his armor and stood bare-chested, a stone longsword gripped in his hand. Opposite him, Shilon had loosened his mentor's robe and tied it around his waist. He too held a stone sword. The two swordmasters faced each other like opposing peaks, sharp auras coiling around them. The air between them seemed to hum, momentum invisible but fierce, clashing like the first roll of distant thunder. Stone swords? Going traditional? Need to warm your old bones up? Harlan teased, waving his blade in a practiced flourish that sent a spray of glittering sword blossoms into the air. Shilon snorted. He traced a precise semicircle with his own stone sword and settled into a ready stance. "Are you an idiot?" he shot back. "This is for the apprentices. Watching a proper duel will teach them more than any lecture." Even in the seconds before blades met, Shilon didn't forget his duty as a mentor. A match between two swordmasters was rare. With the war's scattering veterans across the front lines, opportunities for direct instruction were precious. How much the apprentices could learn from this one demonstration depended on their eyes and their talent. Because an opponent had come to his door of his own accord, Shilon had to seize the opportunity. The so-called traditional swordsmanship they were about to use was a paradoxical discipline developed by the Night Watch for training self-control. Its edge was dull and its offensive power modest, but in skilled hands it became eerily effective. The style depended on blades forged from Nur-white stone and was known simply as restraint. When a Nur-white stone blade was ground down to a thickness of about a millimeter, it revealed a strange property. Along its length, it was unbelievably tough, but under lateral pressure, the blade would snap at the slightest provocation. A restraint bout was straightforward in its rules. Either combatant could use any movement to strike, and the goal was to sever the opponent's sword while keeping your own intact. It sounded simple. In practice, it demanded an exceptional degree of control and technical mastery. Because they had agreed to begin with the traditional method, the atmosphere between them was not tense or drawn out. Both men approached each other with a relaxed composure. Harlan moved lightly, every muscle loose yet ready, calibrating his body to the exact state he needed. Shilon swung his limbs once to loosen the tension in his shoulders. Jeng, the two stone swords met with a clear, ringing hum that rolled across the training ground, both salute and challenge in one sound. Harlan struck first. As their blades met, he poured sudden force into his arm and slid his sword down along Shilon's, aiming for his face. "Your intent is too obvious," Shilon said in that calm, teacher-like voice. He gave his blade a small twist, meeting edge with edge and driving back Harlan's strike. When stone swords bite against each other, brute force can be a liability. The stronger blow concentrates stress at the contact point and risks shattering the blade. Harlan snorted and locked his muscles, stopping the descending sword dead, the heart of the technique called restraint, the instantaneous control of limb and weapon to halt motion. The instant the blade stopped, Harlan's sword defied the stillness and snapped into a horizontal slash, pivoting 90 degrees. Oh! Along the edge of the training ground, the tactical apprentices sucked in their breath. There was no shouting, no flashing techniques. This fight was a ruthless examination of fundamentals. Doom watched with clenched fists, picturing the nightmare of facing an opponent who could move his sword at will and control its every angle on the battlefield. Shilon's face was hard with intent. It was time to make the young man feel some real difficulty. They struck and pulled apart after a single exchange. Shilon's stone blade arced upward from below in a rising thrust. Harlan fought with a blunt, aggressive style. He wouldn't meet an attack with a flat block but chopped down, aiming to cleave through the incoming blade. His eyes said it all. Whoever yields is a coward. Their gazes locked like crossing blades, each trying to look through the other. Neither would give ground. Both wanted a clear victor. A low grunt escaped them as the swords met. At the instant of contact, breathing held, both men forced their blades to a dead stop, locked together in a tense, instantaneous standoff where one wrong move would mean blood. Two simple exchanges left both grand swordsmen dripping with sweat after only 2 rounds. Their feet were planted like ancient trunks, arms bulging and locked taut, veins standing out, yet every fiber of those muscles had to be ready to relax in an instant. Even for battle-hardened veterans, that kind of constant, explosive control was grueling. Their blades met softly, and they stood like mirror images of one another, edges in precise contact through every forward and backward movement. The finesse and restraint each displayed were beyond what ordinary fighters, or even the Night Watch, could hope to match. For a few seconds at a time, their swords remained pressed together, faces slick with sweat, muscles reddened from the repeated, instantaneous tension and release. "Warm-up's about done, isn't it?" Harlan asked, reading the way Shilan's stamina dipped and offering a way out. "About done," Shilan agreed. He knew as well as Harlan that traditional swordplay was almost too simple a test for two grand swordsmen. In a match governed by restraint, how could one grandmaster ever truly best another, much less cleave through his opponent's blade? By ordinary standards, a match like this, one that could easily drag on until both fighters were spent, was never truly decisive. It made more sense to conserve strength for the second stage, when the contestants would use their real skill to settle the outcome. The basic form every Night Watchman knew was traditional swordsmanship. The finishing move, the thing that actually decided who won, was advanced swordsmanship. Advanced swordsmanship was a catch-all. Any technique that went beyond the basics counted. Instinctive, developed, or simply idiosyncratic styles all fit under that name. Harlan fought with instinctive, finely honed techniques that qualified as advanced swordsmanship, and Shilan's own methods were no less so. There was no strict definition. If a swordsman evolved a distinctive way of fighting, it was advanced swordsmanship. They switched to their well-tempered iron longswords and took a few measured breaths, gathering themselves for the real fight to come. At the sight of both combatants preparing to go all out, Queen Daisy's face tightened. She seemed to remember something important, an expression that suggested a sudden recollection of a crucial lesson. "Later you can study Harlan's swordsmanship, but you mustn't learn anything else. Promise me." Daisy dropped her usual softness and fixed Doom with a stern look. "Don't learn anything at all." Seeing his mother's face, Doom straightened and replied seriously, "I promise. I won't learn anything except the swordsmanship." No sooner had he said it than Harlan, standing on the field, spoke up. In that instant, Doom understood why his mother had been so adamant. Harlan's words were a weapon of their own, and everything but his blade was dangerous to imitate. "Old man," Harlan sneered across the distance, "when my wife gave birth to your great-grandson, you couldn't even be bothered to visit?" Harlan's tongue moved faster than the steel in his hand. The insult hit Shilan like a blow. His aura wavered, and veins stood out at his temple. Seizing the split second of hesitation, Harlan closed the gap. His sword flashed, weaving an unbreakable net that pushed Shilan back again and again. Everyone knew Harlan fought with brutal directness. Every thrust and cut aimed for the soft gaps, the throat, the joints. "Look at you," Harlan mocked as he pressed the attack. "Your sword hand is trembling." "Why not just retire and go home?" the man called out. His words were as sharp as his blade. Doom had heard of the champion swordsman's reputation, but he didn't know the man personally. Now, watching him on the field, Doom realized the champion's tongue was as dangerous as his steel. The man never stopped talking. Taunts, prods, relentless commentary, and the non-stop chatter made Doom uneasily aware of how potent the man's verbal aggression could be. Queen Daisy repeated her warning with a gravity Doom had never seen on her face before. "Even if his methods work, do not learn them," she said. "You are a prince of the Navik family. You may accept defeat with grace, but you must never win the way he does." Doom bowed his head and nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. His role and Harlan's were not the same. Harlan could throw off restraint and use any means necessary to claim victory. That was the duty of a champion. A royal, however, had to keep his dignity. Chapter 35. Pick up the sword. First, they met on the field as two masters at the peak of their art. The moment their blades crossed, the fight erupted, so fast each exchanged a dozen strikes a second, their swords a blur that dazzled the eye. Harlan's swings cast a lattice of light that seemed to try and trap Shilan, threads of steel woven into a shimmering net. But Shilan stayed calm in the cold flash of steel. His replies landed at the perfect angles, slicing through the gaps in Harlan's web. He did more than defend. He countered. Gradually, with exquisite footwork and blade control, Shilan seized the tempo. Wide, balanced cuts and precise parries began to dismantle Harlan's furious onslaught. "Old man," Shilan taunted, "don't you have any new tricks? Still the same routine?" Without warning, Harlan changed his style. In an instant, he slipped free of the deadlock he'd been forced into. The champion roared, "Throat!" and drove his longsword in a sharp, lethal thrust straight for Shilan's neck. Shilan's face went stern. He dared not relax and lifted his longsword to intercept the blow aimed at his throat. Harlan's blade writhed like a venomous snake, changing angles in an instant and coming straight for the same spot. Harlan's words made flesh. If he said throat, he meant the throat. Shilan fell back sharply, putting distance between them, but Harlan's sword was persistent, clinging like a maddening parasite. "Left collarbone," a warning snapped in Shilan's ear. There was no time to deliberate. If he committed to guarding his left ribs, Harlan would fight. If he hesitated, the blade would find purchase. An experienced great swordsman, Shilan ignored the taunt and watched. He saw the moment the thrust withdrew, the split-second opening, and drove his own sword in response. Their blades rang together again and again, clang, clang, clang. Dozens of collisions in rapid succession. Under the force of their blows, the edges of both fine steel longswords began to chip and splinter, serrating like saw teeth. It was a magnificent duel. Even Doom, with his keen eyes and tactical mind, couldn't help clenching his fists and cheering inwardly. The crowd at the training ground were flushed with excitement, but no one dared cheer or cry out for fear of disturbing the two combatants. As the duel wore on, the field fell into a tense hush, every spectator waiting for that single decisive strike. "Heart!" Harlan's warning cut through the quiet. They both heard it. The moment to decide the contest had arrived. Harlan's longsword flashed like a venomous snake, quick and sneering as it lunged for Shilan. Shilan only smirked. He drew his blade back, angling his defense to catch Harlan's sword between guard and blade, then twisted with sudden force. Bang! The already nicked blade couldn't take the torque. It split down the middle. The tip of Harlan's longsword flew away. The blade fractured about a third of the way from the point. At that instant, every apprentice leapt to their feet, ready to celebrate Shilan's apparent victory. In a duel between masters, even a fraction of reach can decide everything. An inch longer, an inch stronger. At that moment, all Shilan had to do was fall back and keep his distance. Harlan wouldn't stand a chance. The crowd thought so. Shilan thought so. He retreated quickly, stretching the advantage of his reach. Harlan laughed, a cold, cruel sound. He didn't rush to close the gap. Instead, he threw a punch, aiming it so the broken blade in his hand sat between his knuckles like a hidden dagger. Their voices cut through the arena at the same time, each shouting the other's defeat. The spectators froze, unable to tell who had actually won. Shilan's sword lay against Harlan's shoulder. One sweep, and he could cleave the man's head off. And in the narrow opening of Harlan's fist, the jagged fragment pointed straight at the spot between Shilan's brows. "If this were a battlefield," Harlan said, "this bit of metal would have gone through your head. You wouldn't have had a chance to kill me." Shilan's grip gottened. "Unfortunately for you," he said, "this isn't a battlefield. Victory and defeat aren't a matter of life and death," Shilan said earnestly as he sheathed his longsword. "They're governed by rules. The battlefield has its rules. A contest has its rules. If you could mix everything together, what need would there be for rules at all?" "Enough!" Harlan waved him off with a dismissive sneer. He didn't look worried. "I care only about winning and losing on the field, not about rules and philosophy." Shilan's voice dropped, grave and low. "Harlan Ogilvy, you had every opportunity to put an old man like me down. You saw through my feints, you knew my options, and yet you chose to strike as if guided by instinct without any thought to strategy. That narrow focus on the immediate keeps your master swordsman techniques from ever being truly owned." "Stop! Don't say another word!" Harlan flailed a hand, suddenly pleading. "I yield! I yield!" Shilan gave a short, final shake of his head. "Today, I am not the principal actor here. We've already delayed Doom long enough. No more talk." He opened his mouth as if to add something, then quietly swallowed the words. "Continue training," Shilan barked, and his sharp command scattered the young warrior apprentices. Only a few remained. This was no business for them. He smiled softly, took Doom by the arm, and drew him close. Go to the training ground. Harlan Ogilvy will teach you the basics. Your mother and I need to speak. All right. Doom nodded and slipped away. When the adults were talking about important matters, he knew to give them space. Harlan, who had been standing nearby, glanced at Shilan and then at himself. Me? He asked, puzzled, pointing in his own direction. Shilan's expression turned serious. Harlan saw the look, and without further questions, fell into step behind Doom. When the two had gone, Shilan turned to Queen Daisy. Your Majesty, he said quietly, the royal family's curriculum has been the same for 1,000 years. Are you not going to answer an old man's question? In the Nawick royal house, nothing was trivial. Every decision rippled outward. Matters of education, in particular, were carefully guarded. The order in which a prince or princess learned their lessons shaped how they saw the world. It altered their judgments and the choices they would make. Such things could not be changed on a whim. A prince should be sent to the command division first. He needs to build a comprehensive strategic perspective, understand the consequences of his choices, and how they will shape the lives of countless people. Physical training and battlefield skill are necessary, but they come second. A soldier who makes a bad call in combat risks his own life, and at worst, the loss of a small squad. If a commander blunders, the result can be total defeat. A commander must be cool and calculating, able to suppress the lust for glory in order to secure victory. A warrior, by contrast, needs the fury to kill the man in front of him. The two mindsets are fundamentally different, and the education you receive first largely determines how you will think. Shilan could not understand why Daisy had sent Doom to the warrior school before anything else. King Nawick had openly declared Doom his son and heir. Shilan had been one of the witnesses, so why give him the training that most encourages single-minded aggression rather than the wide, political and strategic view a prince requires? Could it be some kind of court intrigue? Shilan found himself uneasy. He was no pure swordsman like Harlan Ogilvy. Having served 2 King Nawicks, his instincts were honed. He couldn't help being suspicious. It's not what you think, Queen Daisy blurted, meeting the court swordsman's suspicious stare. Nawick told me to do this. King Nawick? Shilan's expression went immediately serious. Do I have a right to know? Daisy's face matched his gravity. He said that, aside from me, you're the only other person entitled to know. She steered Shilan back into the shadows. After making sure no one was watching, she dropped her voice and spoke cautiously. He foresaw the future. He believes Doom must be able to wield a weapon, must have the power to defend himself. Shilan felt his pupils shrink and his heart hammer in his chest. Cold sweat prickled down his forehead. Doom needs to protect himself? The implication hit him like a physical blow. King Nawick could no longer be certain that his own powers, or the Night Watch's, would be enough to keep Doom safe. Shilan's mouth went dry. He couldn't imagine what kind of enemy could make Nawick feel so threatened. Then we must hurry. Under Harlan's patient tutelage, Doom took to basic swordsmanship quickly. He practiced with an ease and precision that surprised Harlan. Each movement picked up faster than the last. Doom, Harlan said, from now on, you will follow my instructions. Shilan's voice cut through the training room, colder and more urgent than before. We have to move fast. Put everything you have into this. Learn the way of the warrior thoroughly. Doom, perceptive beyond his years, caught the gravity in Shilan's eyes. The tightness at the corners, the unspoken urgency beneath the words. His small face hardened. He nodded solemnly. I can't wait. Harlan felt the change too. The air grew heavy with purpose. His instincts warned him the road ahead would be far from easy. And so, under their watchful eyes, Doom's life on the path of the warrior began. Chapter 36. No one survived, my lord. Golden light washed across the floor as the master of mankind entered, his radiance filling the room. He wore the gleaming True One armor, yet his steps were almost weightless as he moved forward. The custodes fell into perfect formation behind him, spears poised and banners unfurled, escorting their master into the human modification laboratory, where the metallic tang of blood still hung heavy in the air. The genetic engineers called out in unison, trying to summon the reverence and excitement they felt, but their voices faltered. They bowed their heads in shame and stood motionless. They had failed the mission the master had entrusted them with, a glorious duty, and there was nothing to show for their labor. The gene seed derived from Primarch number 21, a son of the master of mankind, had an implantation success rate far below that of the other legions. In truth, there had been no progress at all. To this day, not a single soldier had been successfully modified. All the test subjects had died on the operating table. None could be forged into the Death Angel the master of mankind demanded. Shrouded in light, his gaze almost palpable, the master walked the lab and took in the wreckage. Rows of immaculate operating slabs framed piles of burnt ash and dark scorch marks. Primarch number 21, his gene seed had once again become a problem. This was not the first time the master had come. Despite the weight of his duties, he still made these visits in person. On his previous inspection, there had already been trouble with the cultures derived from the Primarch's tissue. The seed itself was unlike any of his brothers. It bore none of the outward deformities, no twisted growths, no irregular tendrils, no unmistakable taint of the warp. Instead, it was unnervingly perfect, a crystalline, blood-red amber that encased a walnut-sized core, the whole barely larger than an egg. The gene seed from Primarch number 21 was so thoroughly integrated that the genetic engineers could not extract enough material to cultivate the superhuman organs they needed. After countless failures and the expenditure of vast resources, the master of mankind personally intervened to settle the experimenters' doubts. Whether because of a warp-born demigod trait or a postnatal mutation, this particular gene seed did not require external organ cultivation. Once implanted into a test subject's chest, it would take root and grow on its own. Within 7 teradays, the implanted gene seed would spontaneously generate superhuman organs, and even some additional organs whose purposes were not immediately understood. The naturally formed organs produced no rejection in the hosts. They dramatically enhanced performance while integrating so seamlessly with the recipient that they functioned as if they had been present from birth. The technical staff were ecstatic. Not only would the modification cycle for the Death Angel be drastically shortened, but overall safety would be improved by several grades. Compared with the other legions, the gene-forged warriors meant to inherit Primarch number 21 were designed to be taller, faster, and stronger. They were supposed to be the master of mankind's razor, his answer to humanity's enemies, the instrument that would restore human glory. If that were truly the case, the master would never have needed to return in person. But the implantation process had run into a problem no one had anticipated. Every test subject had died. The success rate was a flat 0. While other legions were training hard and already showing the first sparks of battlefield capability, not a single recruit of the 21st had survived long enough to leave the operating table. Gene Artificer, report what you know. A custodian stepped forward. As the master's most constant servants, the custodians carried his words. The master's voice flowed through the golden-armored warrior's lips, lyrical and calm. The sound cut through the bleakness of the laboratory like a light, dispelling despair and lending an invisible, steadying authority. My lord. The gene artificer rose from his stool, peeling himself away from the blood-stained operating table. His auxiliary arms, sleek mechanica that had been still moments before, began to move again, each motion precise and measured as he readied himself to answer. The gene artificer spoke with heavy regret. Test subject number 3334, like all the previous subjects, developed fully formed organs. 2 weeks after the gene seed was implanted, he suffered a catastrophic whole-body hemorrhage. In the other cases, the subjects ultimately combusted to ash. This, he said, is the only body we managed to preserve. He moved slowly to a stainless steel refrigerator and opened it. Inside lay the corpse of a giant 3 meters tall. Naked and enormous, his limbs and torso were corded with bulging muscles, every fiber taut with latent power. His flesh had the look of iron, hard, unforgiving, and though he had been dead for some time, the body still radiated a crude, violent presence. To see such a formidable specimen preserved on a cold slab was both chilling and mournful. "My lord, please look," the artificer prompted. The master of mankind inclined his head and followed the machine arm's motion. The closer he looked, the more dreadful the sight became. The giant's skin was a map of wounds. Deep claw scars, knife slashes, bite marks, axe gashes, nearly every kind of injury a human tool or beast could inflict was etched into him. Dark blood still stained the wounds, seeping from fissures in the flesh. The pattern was terrifyingly abnormal, as if the body had endured endless concentrated violence before whatever final calamity had ended it. The giant's flesh bore no unmarked skin. It looked as if 1,000 instruments had taken their toll. Scars and healed lacerations crisscrossed the body, each one a testament to pain. The corpse did not look like a fresh recruit or a laboratory specimen. It looked like a battle-hardened warrior, someone who had survived countless fights only to die on an unimaginably cruel field. The gene artificer summoned a holographic panel and projected a three-dimensional recording for the master of mankind. The footage was unnervingly lifelike, a complete, frame-by-frame record from the moment the gene seed was implanted until the subject's last breath. Bound to the operating table by multiple restraints, the test subject lay motionless while technicians worked. When the blood-red gene seed was placed into his chest, the change began. What had been a medium-built, slightly lean frame erupted into violent growth. Over the next week, the data showed nothing short of a metamorphosis. Bone density spiked, muscle mass swelled, dermal resistance increased, and every organ adjusted to the new physiology. Every metric outstripped comparable warriors from other legions, taller, bulkier, faster, stronger. But after the period of rapid development ended, the footage took a darker turn. The subject began to struggle. At first it was small, twitching fingers, a tightening of the jaw. Then the motions became convulsions. Muscles spasmed so forcefully that the skin strained and started to split along new seams. Internal indicators, heart rate, oxygen saturation, neural stability, fluctuated wildly. The gene seed's integration, which had at first been clean and efficient, showed signs of instability, errant growth patterns, vascular rupture, and neurological feedback loops that could not be dampened. Technicians moved to intervene, but the restraints held. The man's lungs heaved, blood bubbled at the corners of his mouth, and the panel recorded pressure spikes that exceeded all safety thresholds. In the final minutes, the subject's body fought itself. Tendons tore, bones creaked and snapped under the surge of newly formed mass, and the skin became a map of fresh wounds. Then, almost as abruptly as the transformation had started, the biostat curves collapsed. Heart activity ceased, neural readings flatlined, and the man went still. The corpse beside them was the end result, a body that had achieved monstrous strength and resilience, but at the cost of fatal instability. The master of mankind watched the replay in silence as the gene artificer closed the projection. The lesson was clear. The gene seed produced warriors of extraordinary capability, but the process was volatile, and the margin for error remained deadly small. His eyes bulged, rimmed with crimson fury. He ground his teeth until they cracked and shattered, letting out ragged, hollow animal roars. Every muscle coiled, the restraints groaned, and the operating table rocked as he thrashed. Then the wounds appeared, as if torn from nothing. Blood gushed, flesh split and opened in a dozen different places. For a moment, the subject's superhuman healing knit the injuries closed, and then they ripped open again. Heal, tear, in a vicious, unending loop. Pain rolled through him without pause, etching scars deeper into the body with each cycle. When he finally bellowed, it was not a cry of pain, but a sound of pure, incandescent fury. Hate poured into noise. The scream made everyone present's blood run cold. The master of mankind frowned. He had never heard such concentrated hatred from a human before. It was endless and inexorable. The custodian warriors tightened their grips on their guardian spears. The hatred carried by the projected image was almost tactile, chillingly real. Around the chamber, technicians clapped hands over their ears and trembled. Even those who had seen this scene tens of thousands of times were shaken anew by the raw, terrifying anger on display. "I will slaughter you all." His eyes were bulging and bloodshot, the cry echoing like a physical blow. The killing intent that poured from him crawled along the custode's spines. What on terra was this? It was no longer a human emotion. That towering hatred had eclipsed anything they had seen, a fury that felt as if it could rend worlds. Hatred and pain flared together, and the test subject's body gave way. In an instant, life was gone. A shaft of golden light rose up and swept through the room, driving the fear from their hearts and calmed the lingering rage that filled the laboratory. The master of mankind said nothing. He walked to the refrigerator, face unreadable, and laid a hand on the cold metal. He felt the faint residue of a soul in the body and reached with his sight into that residue, seeking the source of the towering fury. His arm trembled once, a flicker so slight the custodians and lab staff did not notice. He withdrew his hand and closed his fingers into a gentle fist. A wave of sorrow rose in him, and he sighed, a small, private sound. A human had truly died. Their soul had been scattered, obliterated both in the real universe and in the warp. Only he knew the truth. The soul of the man on the operating table had been utterly destroyed, reduced to ash by a blaze of fury. "Next test subject," intoned a custodian. Another, speaking the Emperor's will, added, "I will work with you to explore the unknown." The master of mankind sat on his throne in the great hall, burning with a cold, uncontainable anger. He wanted to see who had erased a human soul so completely. The gene artificer bowed. A custodian fell in behind him, bearing the next test subject forward into the light. "It's him. It's really him." The recruitment office sat on a plaza a short distance from the laboratory. Young men and women came here to enlist in the Emperor's forces, to register, undergo gene screening, and if they passed, earn the chance to become one of the Emperor's death angels. In a dark, unlit corner of that same plaza, a young man was curled into himself. He bore the dark hair and eyes of an ancient Asian lineage. His body was gaunt from prolonged malnutrition, but an unruly pride still marked his brow. He possessed nothing but a single battered suitcase. He was not a subject of the Emperor. He had been spotted by a patrol while free climbing the Himalayas, crossing the roof of the world, and slipping illegally into imperial territory. After a battery of checks, the authorities judged he posed no threat. Inside the suitcase were relics from old Terra, his family's old genealogy, the brittle pages recording names and lineages. He had crossed the roof of the world in a single layer of clothing. When they found him, he was badly frostbitten, yet even then, he had wrapped that suitcase in rags and held it close, guarding those long-lost names with the last of his strength. He had crossed Mount Everest on little more than stubborn will. Why he'd been able to endure such a journey, he kept to himself. Now he stood in the recruitment plaza clutching his battered suitcase, eating the thin relief porridge handed out by the local warlord. The soup was watery, but he was grateful. Terra had been in turmoil for millennia, and a ruler who still took the trouble to feed wanderers was a rare, practical sort of king. He let the warmth of the porridge settle in his belly and relished the uncommon feeling of being full for once. His eyes, quick, alert, swept the plaza. It was enormous, floored with bluestone and ringed by high walls that could hold tens of thousands. Farther in, a recruitment office had been set up to register volunteers and run gene tests. Based on those results, the office would assign promising candidates to the Legion best suited to their genetic makeup, so each recruit's natural talents could be put to use. Long lines snaked toward the office. At a glance, the crowd contained every kind of person. Hardened veterans and wide-eyed youths, rugged laborers, and people who had clearly known better days. He kept his distance and watched, suitcase at his feet, thinking about the choices that had brought him here and the uncertain path ahead. Nobles in family crests, uniformed soldiers, ragged wasteland wanderers, even gang members. He watched them all and shook his head in confusion. They were a mixed lot, some respectable, some not, yet without exception they had pledged themselves, and in many cases their sons, to the same lord, marching off to the brutal Terra War. He had heard the man called himself the Emperor, promising to reunify Terra and restore some fragile unity to humanity's ravaged homeworld. Since the age of strife, the planet had been torn and scarred. Countless would-be saviors had risen with the same grand ambitions, unification, a return to the stars, only to be swallowed by the fighting. No one had succeeded. The young man finished his porridge, scraped the last from the bowl with his tongue, and stood slowly. With a voice that was unexpectedly earnest, he said, "I hope he succeeds." He handed the empty bowl back to the relief station with both hands, then eased down into his corner, his box at his feet, and waited for tomorrow's ration. There was a quiet intensity in his dark eyes, but his gaze burned as he took in the tall figures on the walls and scattered through the plaza. They wore power armor and stood with chests thrust out, cranes among chickens. When one of the shorter giants in the distance glanced his way, he immediately lowered his head. Those genetically modified warriors had sharp senses and were formidable. A flash of envy crossed his face. He'd gone through gene testing just days earlier. The results had been excellent, clean, high-quality genes, but he hadn't been selected. At 21, he was at the peak of human physical ability, yet he had missed the ideal window for modification. Insiders said adolescence was the optimal time for genetic alteration, and the older a candidate grew, the greater the risks. The risk itself meant nothing to him. For someone desperate to gain strength and a foothold in the brutal Terra conflict, danger was a price he was willing to pay. The Emperor had no patience for wasting time and resources on projects with a low chance of success. He wouldn't squander men and material on uncertain experiments. The young man, for his part, refused to join the auxiliary army. His pride wouldn't let him become someone's servant. He tugged at the rags wrapped around his body, trying to seal out the dust and the radiation that could rot a man's skin. He liked this particular corner by Primarch No. 21's recruitment office. It was quiet and sheltered. It seemed to be for some specialized unit. Few people signed up here, and the clerks were always idle. What he didn't realize was that many in the plaza were quietly watching him, their faces a mix of curiosity and pity. Primarch 21's office was whispered about as the death recruitment office. No one who went in for the gene modification surgery had ever come out alive. Earlier that morning, the entrance had been crowded with volunteers, men and women, ready to offer their lives to the Emperor. Now, the square was quieter, but the memory of that rush lingered. Months after word spread through the nobility that no one had survived the modification surgeries, the flow of volunteers to Primarch No. 21's recruitment office dwindled. A long list of promising candidates had already died on the operating table. Dying for the Emperor was a sacred duty, life and death set aside, but no one wanted to be consumed in a humiliating, hopeless experiment. Powerful houses quietly forbade their scions from signing up. To squander a precious life on a surgery that was effectively a death sentence would dishonor the family and invite ridicule. If there had been even a 1%, 1,000% chance of success, people would still have clamored to enlist. Tens of thousands had tried, and the 100% mortality rate had not been broken. The result was a strange mixture of emotions among the watching crowds: pity, contempt, schadenfreude, and beneath them all, a hard, eager curiosity. Those countless eyes kept returning to the young man. Primarch No. 21's recruitment office was no refuge. As volunteer numbers dwindled, the gene artificers had begun to seize people from the surrounding streets. At any moment, this wanderer could be hauled off for experiments. He had no way of knowing. He didn't possess heightened senses or any special warning, just a thin coat, a battered suitcase, and the weary practice of conserving energy so he wouldn't miss the next bowl of porridge. He was dozing in a shadowed corner, half mumbling, "Where are the people?" when a voice cut through the air and woke him as if someone had thrown cold water on his face. He had never felt so much authority in a single sound. The voice was deep and resonant, like distant spring thunder, and somehow like sunlight tearing away the fog that had lodged in his chest. Every trace of sleep fled. The young man pushed himself upright, craned his neck, and looked. Standing at the center of the hall was a warrior in gleaming gold armor. A red plume crowned his helmet. A red cloak fell from his shoulders. He held a spear as if it were part of him. The room went still, and then a chorus of reverent voices rose, "My lord!" The crowd in the recruitment plaza fell back like a tide. Men and women dropped to their knees and cried out in unison, "My lord!" A hush ran through everyone there at the sight of the golden-armored warrior. The custodian's presence carried the weight of an emperor. The young man swallowed hard, forcing down the instinct to prostrate himself. He stared at the gilded figure, hungry for that kind of power. Is he the lord of this place? He wondered. Only a lord could command such majesty. A gene artificer walking behind the custodian stepped forward and, with a touch of embarrassment, spoke softly. "My lord, after tens of thousands of failures, many have lost faith in Primarch number 21. No noble scion or military house can bear endless losses." He glanced toward the recruits. They sent their best offspring for Astartes modification, only to receive grim reports and bodies. The custodian considered the words for a moment. His helmet plume swayed in the breeze as he inclined his head. "I understand." Then he took a step forward. The custodian's power armor clanked along the bluestone path, metal on stone, composing a harsh, mechanical rhythm. His spear rattled against the pauldron with each step. When his voice came through the helmet speakers, it was deep and resonant, filling the recruitment plaza. "I am the Emperor's custodian. I need a brave warrior to offer his life." A wind of raised arms swept through the kneeling crowd. No one shrank back. Everyone reached up at once, eager to volunteer, even though they all understood what that summons meant. The custodian had come from the gate of Primarch number 21. To answer him was to choose a likely, almost certain death. "Very good," the custodian said, satisfied, about to single out a promising-looking youth. Then his enhanced senses caught a different look, a steady, appraising stare from the edge of the plaza. He turned. In a shadowed corner, half reclining and propped on one hand, sat a ragged wanderer. He looked barely alive, emaciated, gaunt, skin sallow, but his eyes were bright and unclouded. They held no devotional fervor, no starry worship. Instead, they flicked over the custodian like a slow, clinical assessment. The custodian's brow tightened beneath his golden helmet. He hated being stared at like that, but the hunger for power burning in those eyes was almost intoxicating. The custodian's superhuman mind turned over the problem in an instant, and an idea surfaced. The gene artificer had told him that Primarch number 21 didn't care about the recipient's age. Compatibility was off the charts. Anyone would do. Without hesitation, he raised his golden arm, pressed his middle and index fingers together, and pointed at the thin wanderer huddled in the corner. "He'll do." A roar of voices answered, half cheer, half prayer. "Left 0, right fire, Lord Lay, help me. Send the recommendation tickets." Chapter 38, Ancient Nobles. The golden-armored warrior's voice crackled through the respirator grill, muffled and hoarse but unmistakable. The assembled youths, countless volunteers, each ready to give their lives for the Imperium of Man, froze in stunned silence. None of them understood why the Emperor's own representative would single out such a frail figure. Still, no one dared to question it. The custodes held authority granted directly by the Emperor. Their words carried weight that brooked no challenge. The chosen young man stood open-mouthed, bewildered. He blinked then, as if waking from a dream, weakly pointed at himself. "Me." Before he could collect himself, 2 attendants in blue robes, servitors of the gene artificers, surged forward and seized his arms, hauling him toward Gate 21. My box, he cried. For a moment, everything else fell away. Ignoring the danger, a surge of desperate strength erupted from his gaunt frame. He jerked against their grips and lunged for his battered leather suitcase. Before he could reach it, a searing pain lanced through his leg. The golden-armored giant snatched his ankle with surgical precision and spun him completely around. Li Tang found himself dangling upside down in the custodian's hand like a scrawny monkey. "My box!" he shouted. For a moment, the young man showed no fear. His face went hard with defiance. He kicked back at the custodian's gauntlet, ignoring the blood running from his ankle. Then there was a crisp crack as bone gave way. His slender calf snapped, but he didn't relent. Planting his other foot against the custodian's arm, he bit his lip to choke off a cry and tried to wrench his trapped leg free. "Humph," he forced out. A muted groan hung in the suddenly silent square. On the city wall, Thunder Warriors and Astartes, who had watched the scene, exchanged looks of surprised, private admiration. A mere mortal, even to the point of self-mutilation, daring to struggle against those arrogant, golden-armored warriors, his tragic courage earned their respect. The kneeling crowd glistened with sweat. Dust hung in the air so thick that the sunlight cut through it like a blade, searing at their faces and spirits. To resist the custodes, everyone knew that was the same as resisting the Emperor's will. Just when it felt as if his muscles might tear from the strain, the custodes released him. The wanderer dragged himself into a corner, clutching a small leather box to his chest. Instead of anger, the custode's voice rang out, loud and approving. Remarkable courage. The young man looped the box around his neck, and when the blue-robed attendants moved forward to help, raised a hand to halt them. He lifted his chin stubbornly and spoke, slow and clear. "I'll walk myself." Leaning with one shoulder against the wall, he hauled himself up and limped toward Gate 21. As the high-speed lift descended, its open grills revealed the world outside, factories belching thick smoke and the Himalayas, hollowed and being reshaped, undergoing vast, relentless construction. "This is my lord's palace," the golden-armored warrior said with easy pride. "When it's finished, it will be the tallest building on this planet." The young man said nothing. He hugged the small leather box to his chest and stared past the palace as if into another world. Sweat beaded at his hairline. He wiped it away with a furtive hand. The corner of his mouth twitched under his hood, but he didn't dare speak. Fortunately, this custodes had a patient temperament. Had it been anyone else, the man thought, they would already have shown the ignorant loiterer what a dozen punches in a second felt like. Instead, the warrior merely pointed at the box. "What's that?" he asked, without annoyance. The young man tightened his grip and went even more rigid, saying nothing. The custodes didn't push the matter. They were in the conscription square. Everyone here had already passed security screening. There wouldn't be any unpleasant surprises. The golden-armored warrior couldn't have imagined the frail young man, broken leg, sallow skin, and all but gaunt, would pose any threat to the emperor's personal guard. "What's your name?" the custodes asked again, each word measured and calm. This time the question reached him. The youth's black eyes traveled slowly over the custodes, taking him in from head to toe. After a long, deliberate moment, he only shook his head. "A pity," the custode said with a rueful shake of his own. "You're interesting, remarkably stubborn. A name like yours would be worth etching inside my armor." The young man's gaze, though, held something like contempt. Quiet, deep, unmistakable. The custode's fingers twitched as if to peek for more information. He searched the boy for a sign, for anything else to read, but found nothing. The lift began to slow. They were close. The boy's face remained composed, neither pleading nor fearful. His voice came out thin and rasping from hunger and pain. "Will I die?" he asked the gene artificer. "Yes," the gene artificer answered, clinical and unflinching. The laboratory doors swung open. A custodian stepped forward to offer assistance, but the young man refused it, pressing on stubbornly, despite being drenched in sweat. Cold sweat trickled down his face. He ground his teeth and would not be helped. Then, remembering the emperor was present, he quickly added, "Or perhaps not." The custodes watched him, shaking their heads, baffled by the young man's pride and stubborn defiance. From a great, radiant glow, a voice rang out, full of surprise. "Plato." It was vast as the sea and clear as a bell, but there was a slight, rusted pause to it, as if it had not spoken aloud in a very long time. "You have brought me an extraordinary gift." Plato dropped briefly to one knee, bracing himself on his spear. He had not heard the emperor's true voice in so long. Usually it spoke directly into his mind, flat and impersonal. Now the sight before him matched the dreams he had kept, holy radiance, the supreme leader's most divine countenance. It was unbearably familiar, intimate, and compelling. His knees nearly gave way, and he almost fell fully to the ground to accept instruction and pledge himself. But he did not. Though he bowed on one knee, he stopped short of prostration, refusing, in that small movement, to surrender everything. When his knees buckled, he forced a step forward on his shattered leg. Pain like ice and fire burned down to his bone marrow. "Hypocritical illusion," he spat, staring straight into the sacred radiance. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth. He had bitten off the tip of his tongue. His voice, raw and trembling, tore out of him in a single defiant roar. "Don't think you can deceive me. Don't think you can control me." The exhausted shout rolled through the laboratory and stunned everyone there, even the custodes. The emperor's personal guard had seen countless iron-willed men. The light had laid all of them low. Yet this young man was standing against the radiance with sheer force of will. "Li Tang," the emperor called, an old Terran surname, emblematic of a truly ancient noble line. "Who are you?" At the sound of his name, an alarm exploded inside Li Tang's head. He wanted to turn and run, but his body would not obey. It felt as if the radiant figure saw through him. Every private thought caught, every memory inspected, even the shape of his future laid bare. Li Tang felt himself slipping, felt the scrutiny strip him down. No, he felt exposed, as if he were an open book being read page by page. "You don't know me, and until now I didn't know you," the Emperor said from within the radiance. He rarely smiled, but there was the ghost of one on his face. Yet he added, almost offhand, "But I know your genetic ancestor." Li Tang's eyes narrowed. He wouldn't be fooled. The figure had said knows, not has seen, a careful choice of words that suggested the golden presence before him had lived far longer than anyone should, 30,000 years at the very least. The Emperor seemed unexpectedly wistful. The heavy plates of his true-form armor made a soft clinking as they tapped the ground. In a voice that carried both age and certainty, he said, "In the 7th century, he founded a great, unified dynasty here. Tankan, I remember, that is what they called him then. All nations came to pay tribute. The 4 barbarians submitted," he intoned, pronouncing the old line in an ancient tongue. No one around them caught the sound. The syllables themselves were foreign. Still, the Emperor's will bent their minds, and the meaning filled the room as plainly as if he had spoken in their own language. Custodes Plato glanced at Li Tang, at the young man standing proud and defiant beneath the golden light. For the first time, the older officer's expression shifted into something like comprehension. Now he saw where Li Tang's arrogance came from, how deep its roots ran, and the reason the youth carried himself like a scion rather than a stranger. A bloodline that had survived the age of ignorance, endured the colonial age, and witnessed the golden age could afford to look at anyone with contempt. The so-called nobles of Terra, men and women conquered by the Emperor or raised into nobility by his grace, might have title and authority, but in terms of ancestral depth, they were children compared to the man standing before them. The Emperor watched him with an inscrutable expression. "Although I am no friend of fate, I cannot help but admire its designs," he said. "At the dawn of a great age, certain people always seem to converge for reasons neither of us can fully explain." He stepped closer. "Li Tang, named for a great dynasty," the Emperor continued. "I see your pride, your stubbornness, your resentment, and your confusion." He gestured toward the blood-stained operating table in the center of the chamber. "There, no one else can do what I can do for you now. I offer you a chance, the power to restore your ancestors' glory. Will you take it?" Li Tang looked from the table to the golden figure before him. The Emperor's words were intoxicatingly persuasive, all promise and inevitability. Still, Li Tang saw through the rhetoric. He understood the bargain being offered and the cost it would entail. Refuse, and he would not simply walk away. Refusal was not a real option, only a choice that would condemn him to a far worse fate. "Keep it safe," Li Tang snapped, thrusting his leather satchel into the golden-armored warrior's hands. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the operating table. Chapter 39. That Man. The genetic engineer stood over the operating table and, without anesthetic, guided the auxiliary arms as a cold laser split Li Tang's sternum and the gene seed was implanted. For a whole Terra week, the master of mankind kept vigil at Li Tang's side. Custodian guards lined the chamber like silent sentinels. Teams of technicians rotated in shifts, watching every physiological change and recording every detail of gene seed number 21. Even after a dozen procedures, the genetic engineer felt the same quiet awe at the sight of life remaking itself. Li Tang lay in a deep sleep, his gaunt frame slowly suffused with fresh vitality as the seed streamed its genetic instructions and remolded flesh from within. It happened almost imperceptibly at first, then unmistakably, a shattered shin knitted together and hardened, muscle and bone filling out, joints and ligaments realigning. By the 5th day, a body nearly 3 meters tall rested on the table where a frail man had been. Li Tang let out a soft, involuntary groan. The genetic engineer's chest tightened. He watched the monitors until the numbers steadied. When the vital signs held true, he allowed himself a breath of hope and turned his eyes to the master of mankind seated on the stone throne, waiting for whatever came next. Everything was proceeding according to plan, until it hit a critical moment. When Li Tang's vital signs flatlined, the master of mankind abruptly rose from his seat. He had sensed something impossible. Li Tang's soul still existed, and yet it had vanished simultaneously from both the material world and the warp. The master crossed to the operating table, laid a hand on Li Tang's chest, and tuned into the subtle shifts within the body. A soul's presence always leaves an imprint in the warp. Even the so-called soulless cast a dark, empty hole there. Nothing can truly escape the warp. That was why what he was feeling now was so alarming. Tension tightened the master's senses as he searched for an explanation. At last, beneath the sternum, he detected an anomalous pattern, a fluctuation unlike any ordinary soul signature. Then Li Tang stirred. When he came to, the first thing he noticed was the change within him. His body was still thin and frail, but the injury on his leg had inexplicably healed. He looked up. An endless desert opened before him beneath an orange-red sky, and fierce winds howled across the dunes. He was naked, and he had no idea why he was walking through this place. Maybe he hadn't survived the surgery. Maybe he had died on the operating table. That thought brought a surprising wash of relief. Li Tang smiled, feeling suddenly light. At last he could put down his burdens and rest. He breathed out, and a faint red glow caught his eye. Looking down, he saw a rune stamped on his sunken chest, a red symbol pulsing gently like a slow breath. Before he could make sense of it, the ground under his feet changed. The blood-red sand turned damp, then slippery and clinging. Instinctively he scooped up a handful and squeezed. Slick blood welled up and ran through his fingers. Startled, Li Tang ignored the mark on his chest and stumbled back a few steps, hastily knocking the sticky hue, blood-soaked sand from his hand. When he looked up, terror seized him. The desert, once empty, had become packed with monsters, as if some nightmare had spilled across the sand. Their shapes were grotesque, but consistent enough to show they were the same species. Spiraled horns coiled from their skulls, cloven hooves striking the ground, and pale muscles that flexed with lethal strength. Black, ancient claws and teeth jutted from their mouths and paws. Their faces were a ruin. No noses, no eyes, only empty sockets that burned with a blood-red, sinful light. A strange, oppressive power seemed to crawl over their bodies. Demons. The word burned into Li Tang's mind. An endless host of them lifted their heads and laughed, a hideous, keening sound that rolled like a tide toward the small, fragile figure standing in the sand. At the same time, the maw, RK on his chest, flared bright. Rage surged through him, cold and overwhelming, pressing at his ribs until it almost stopped his breath. Then, clear and detached, a voice spoke inside his head. Kill! Kill them! Or be killed! Li Tang's back teeth ground together. Hatred exploded through him, his hands clenched into fists with the sound of strained knuckles, the muscles in his legs hardening. Kill! He stared at the demons' hulking, rippling bodies, and then at his own slender arms and legs, scanning desperately for cover. A few jagged boulders jutted from the blood-red desert, but they were useless. The demons were pouring in from every direction. I'll kill you all! A roar rose, rolling across the scarlet wasteland. With no escape, Li Tang tightened his jaw, and matching that ferocity, charged into the swarm, intent on tearing them apart. In the next instant, his vision went black. A winged demon had materialized at his side and driven a claw through his chest. Outside, the master of mankind watched as the gene seed released a shimmering, blood-colored barrier that bloomed outward, completely enveloping Li Tang's body. The master of mankind reached out with his psychic power, probing the edge of the barrier with the intent to pierce it and learn its secrets. He had barely begun when Li Tang, strapped to the operating table, convulsed violently. His chest erupted, hot blood spattered across the metal, a terrible unexplained wound opening where there had been none a moment before. The gene artificer reacted at once, rushing forward to bring life support online and pump stabilizing drugs into Li Tang. The master's face did not change. He already understood what had happened. Li Tang's soul had been harmed inside the barrier, and the gene seed, acting as a conduit between spirit and flesh, was transmitting that damage back into his body. Deliberately, the master touched his brow, condensing his will into a razor-thin steel-like needle. With surgical calm, he drove that needle into the gene seed, seeking the root of the corruption. As his consciousness pushed through the barrier, it found a churning, blood-red mist, For a moment, the master looked down at his own hands and was surprised. Their fingers were long and soft, as if youth had been restored to him. He stood bare to the waist, wearing only linen trousers, black hair falling over his chest and splayed behind his head. In that moment, he shed his weariness and the mask he'd been wearing, reverting to his original true self, the young man who still kept his dreams. Without hesitation, the master of mankind lifted his hand and, with a simple, deliberate sweep, brushed aside the blood-red mist. Under his power, the fog thinned and dispersed, and fragments of vision streamed before him. Though he had endured for ages, the sight moved him. He was shaken by what unfolded. In a fractured, lawless spacetime, a humanoid figure appeared, clad in dark green power armor. The face beneath the helm was hidden, yet the master knew, with absolute certainty, that the being was human. Slung across its arms was a primitive, ancient double-barreled shotgun. With that crude weapon, it tore through time and space, rupturing calamity's balances, cutting down evil spirits, and hunting demons through endless, cyclical eras and across innumerable dimensions. The blood-red wastelands of hell itself were trampled underfoot by its merciless advance. Great beings on a scale with the four gods, the eternal, immortal Titan demons, were broken to pieces by one man. These were life forms so powerful that their mere existence could make dimensions collapse and reality splinter. Yet he shattered them. He rode the torrent of time, hunting his way back to the primal era. He purged demons from every timeline, slaughtering through the fiery hells until wails echoed across the realms. Armed with a great sword of judgment and a double-barreled shotgun, he taught demons what pain meant and made hell itself, an incarnation of the concept called evil, no fear. He spoke little. Cold, ruthless, his soul burned via the single, unyielding fury toward demons. That eternal rage cut through eras. His name rang across infinite dimensions. Creatures of the multiverse both feared and worshipped him, crying his name like a prayer and a curse. Doom, destroyer, warrior. He brought down heaven, gods fell before him. He laid waste to demons until even the blazing hell fell silent. He remained mute and relentless, always killing, never stopping. When the final moment came, the decisive clash between the creator and the destroyer warrior, the creator fell, and the destroyer warrior sank into a long slumber. A splinter of his essence broke free and drifted into the cosmic void, its destination lost to the ages. Even across the gulf of time and space, the primordial auras that leaked from both combatants in those visions of the creation-level war pressed on the master of mankind like a physical force. The young man who stood before him was a manifestation of that same consciousness. His eyes were wet with red-tinged tears, a faint smile formed on his lips, and then blossomed into an open, incredulous laugh. He understood everything in that instant, and had never felt such pure joy. He knew exactly where that crimson fragment had gone. The master had hunted that red soul for countless cycles, puzzled by why the four gods, why the evil gods, were so obsessed with it. As the doubts that had lurked inside him dissolved, the answer revealed itself, and it was more beautiful than he had ever dared imagine. 40. I've never been like this. The Emperor understood cause and effect as if they were laid out before him. The mist that had clouded his sight dissolved, and the events that had unfolded in the warp resolved into clarity. The destroyer warrior, its spirit, had fallen into the warp. The Chaos Gods had found it. It had been cast about within that realm and then returned to the material universe. For millennia, the four gods scoured that place and still failed to grasp its secrets. The destroyer warrior's hatred of demonkind had not remained merely emotion, but had been transmuted into something almost conceptual, a force that opposed demons at a fundamental level. That very nature made it difficult, even for the Chaos Gods, to corrupt. The Emperor walked across the desert with light, easy steps. He hummed an ancient tune, smiling with the innocent serenity of a child, yet tears tracked silently down his face. In the vision that enveloped him, an inexhaustible stream of information poured into his mind. There were universes beyond universes. Human civilization was far more flourishing than anyone here imagined. The four gods were not unconquerable. A vast being from the multiverse had already descended into this universe, even if only as a fragment, and that shard of power carried within it an essence of immense potency and limitless possibility. The Emperor moved cautiously, constantly restraining his power for fear of rupturing the trial barrier the gene seed had erected. The wasteland around him was swarming with creatures he had never seen before, demons that were not like those of the warp and somehow more dangerous. They chanted in blasphemous tongues, and a mimetic corruption ate at the air itself, seeping into the ground and gnawing at the souls of the test subjects caught inside. If a subject failed, if their soul was corrupted before they completed the trial, the gene seed would purge the infection without mercy. At the center of that blasted plain, Li Tang fought on, frail and exhausted, locked in a ring of demon carcasses. He panted, never daring to relax for a single beat, constantly driving the things back. Death, rebirth, death, rebirth. Each demon reformed when slain. Each time Li Tang fell, he returned as well. It was a looping, meaningless cycle, and sometimes he no longer had the energy or will even to cut the things down. "This is a great trial," said a clear, youthful voice, faintly shy as if unused to speech, but carrying the strange majesty of a god. During a brief lull in the demon slaughter, Li Tang looked up and saw a black-haired youth sitting on a rock. A faint golden light shimmered around him. The demons ignored the youth entirely and swept straight past to hairy Li Tang. The glow was painfully familiar, the same majestic golden figure he'd seen in the laboratory. Tears glittered in the youth's eyes, but his expression was almost rapturous. When he looked at Li Tang, there was no sorrow, no compassion, no real feeling at all. "Only by passing his trial can you gain recognition," he said. "That power that gallops across the universe, unstoppable." Then he turned and left, giving Li Tang not so much as a clue about how to gain that help. Gene Artificer. The Emperor's awareness slid back into the room. He looked down at the convulsing figure on the slab and, voice flat as a blade, said, "Disconnect the life support. It serves no purpose." He added, without warmth, "The strong offer mercy and opportunity. If one cannot even pass a simple trial, he is not worthy of that mercy." "How many gene seeds did you recover from Subject 21's tissue?" he asked. "My lord." The senior artificer bowed lower and answered candidly, "Only 300. The number earned a faint, surprised lift in the Emperor's expression. The genetic material of other Primarchs had yielded far more. He regarded the assembly of technicians for a long, silent heartbeat. "Gene Artificers," he said finally, "the custodians will take over from here. You have done your work well." He raised a hand and let loose a ripple of psychic light that washed through the lab. "When you leave, your memories of this place will be gone." The artificers accepted the command without protest. They gathered their robes and withdrew. No one lingered to question a decision from a voice such as his. "Custodes," the Emperor's voice rose, resonant and absolute as a clarion. "Activate every one of those 300 gene seeds. Produce only the qualified and spare no expense, regardless of cost." He let the words hang in the air like a decree. Even the custodes, masters of will and mind, felt something like fear at those 4 words. Prepare for the worst. Spoken once, they hung in the air and struck harder than any blade. They had already drained 30,000 candidates with nothing to show for it, not a single viable recruit. The arithmetic was brutal and simple. To forge 300 warriors for the 21st Legion would demand the sacrifice of tens of millions, perhaps 100 million lives. The scale of it made even the most stoic custodian pause. The Emperor read their unspoken calculations like an open page. His answer stunned them, and in an odd way made them envious. 1 billion people, 10 billion people, even if it costs the population of an entire world, I will have them. Those who had been fashioned by his own hands, who carried weapons he had gifted and upheld rules he had set, found him strangely changed. He no longer resembled the measured, calculating sovereign they had always known. In his eyes was the single-minded hunger of a child seeing some impossible treasure, willing to pay any price, heedless of consequence, simply to possess it. In the operating theater, the Emperor wove sigils of psychic power, drawing a tight shroud around the work in progress. He raised a barrier of mind and light to hide them from the warp's ever-watchful prying. When the wards were complete, he turned and walked out, flanked by a silent custodian. "I will help you forget all of this." The Emperor stepped forward, his custodian falling into formation behind him. "Alfarius." "Father, why?" the man in gold answered, alarm in his voice. He was not a custodian. The figure in gilded armor was one of the 21 Primarchs, blown to Terra by a warp storm, Alfarius, Gene Father of the 20th Legion. "You and Malkador taught me to keep secrets," Alfarius said, voice tight. "Have I not been worthy of that trust?" He had watched everything from the operating chamber. He knew the Emperor had ordered the custodes to oversee the cultivation of his brother's progeny, but nothing farther. He did not know what the Emperor had seen behind the barrier of the gene seed, nor why that sight had led to this choice. Now his father asked him to surrender memories to guard a secret he could not even name. Of course. Alfarius faltered, then bowed his head. "If it is your command, if I am not fit to know, do as you will." The Emperor laid a hand against his brow. There was no injury, only a cold, absolute pressure, and a shard of memory was drawn out of Alfarius's mind. It unraveled into a scattering of light and was crushed to motes of starlight before it could fall back into place. Alfarius understood at last that his father had not been asking his counsel. It had been a command dressed as a consultation, an instruction that could not be refused. "What did I forget?" he asked aloud, as if to himself. The starlight before him winked out like a blown candle. A segment of memory went with it, a clean erasure that left a cold blank. From somewhere ahead, the Emperor's voice, calm and absolute, said, "A secret you do not need to keep." He turned toward the operating theater. Custodians stood like bronze sentinels at the door, and a thin, humming psychic barrier stitched the air into a line no one but the Emperor could cross. Curiosity, sharp and improper, rose in Alfarius, but he forced it down and walked away. Malkador, meanwhile, burst into the Emperor's private chamber with a fury that made the heavy door rattle in its frame. "How could you issue such an order?" he demanded. The Emperor stood by the tall window, relaxed against the stone, looking out through the stained glass panes at a sky that could not be seen from Terra. The scent of wine reached Malkador before he fully registered the scene. A bottle of old Terra Red sat uncorked on the table, a tall glass half full with the deep, ruby liquid. The Emperor had known he would come. He had even left a glass upon his arrival, decanted and ready. "Shouldn't you explain?" Malkador's voice was sharp. His anger was not only at the command itself, but at the thought of the Emperor bearing such weight alone. The old man was doing himself to death for this newborn imperium, while 1,000 offices and departments below him always seemed to demand more. Malkador stared at the man before him, casually sipping fine wine, taking in the scenery as if there were no weight on his shoulders. The sight made Malkador half want to bang his head against a wall. How could he be so calm now? The Emperor looked up and said simply, "My old friend." He turned toward Malkador, and Malkador saw a smile he had not expected to see, a smile that time and suspicion had worn thin over tens of thousands of years, but a smile nonetheless. It was a little stiff, guarded by habit, but it was sincere, and to Malkador, unbearably beautiful. He stood frozen, eyes prickling with tears, drinking in that rare expression on the face of the man he had served and loved for so long. Once, the Emperor had been loquacious, lively, expressive. Joy, anger, grief, delight, all of it showed on his face. As his psychic power grew, however, he began to see the future, the slow decline of humanity, and he tried to warn his friends. He hoped, with the other immortals at his side, to steer the species away from a darker fate. But many, intoxicated by the splendors of the Golden Age, would not trust him. Some whispered that his visions had driven him mad. So bit by bit he withdrew. He no longer spoke of prophecies in public. His smiles grew rarer, his features hardening as he nervously prepared for the future he had seen, gathering every scrap of technology that might rebuild humanity. And yet now, for the first time in a long while, Malkador watched his old friend smile, an awkward, genuine smile, as if unused muscles were relearning how to be happy. "Malkador, my old friend," the Emperor said, holding out a stemmed glass. His hand trembled slightly, there were tears in his eyes, and something like joy on his face. "I have never been so happy," he added, voice thick. "I don't know how to put it into words." His face was flushed, whether from drink or from excitement, it was hard to tell. He fumbled for the rest of it, eager to spill everything, but his words came out cramped by urgency. "I can't wait to share it with you." "Don't share it with me." Malkador's expression shifted. He cut him off abruptly. I carry too many secrets. They have bent my back. Then just tell me, what did you see? The Emperor pleaded. He lowered his head, fingers absently rubbing the bowl of the glass. For a long moment he said nothing. When the Emperor looked up, his gaze was steady, and his voice rang out with a single word that stunned Malkador. Hope. With a snap, the stemmed glass shattered, and the Emperor's priceless wine spilled across the floor. Malkador stood frozen. In a universe darkened and encircled by the Chaos Gods, the word hope was at once the most fragile and the most precious thing. The Emperor pulled Malkador into his arms. Both their eyes were bloodshot. Small and frail though it may be, hope has truly arrived.